Welcome back to another story on Watch Harry. This time, we're bringing you Gringotts' curse-breaking ritual revealed Harry as heir to Hogwarts itself and every Dark Lord Knelt. Your likes fuel our creativity. Subscribe and stay tuned. Here's the story. Chapter 1, The Vault Below the Vault. The letter from Gringotts arrived on a Tuesday, which Harry thought was an unremarkable day for something that would eventually change everything. It wasn't threatening, as Goblin correspondence sometimes tended to be. It wasn't even particularly urgent in its tone. The parchment was heavy, cream-colored, stamped with the Gringotts crest, 2 crossed keys over a mountain of gold, and the handwriting was precise in that particular way Goblins had, every letter deliberate, as though the writer considered carelessness a personal insult. Mr. H. Potter, it read. Gringotts Bank of London requests your presence at your earliest convenience regarding a matter pertaining to your account holdings. Specifically, a recent audit of the Potter family vault, Vault 687, has revealed an irregularity that requires your personal attention. We wish to emphasize that this irregularity is not a matter of debt or dispute. It is, rather, a matter of inheritance. Please bring identification. Griplock, Senior Account Manager, Potter Family Accounts. Harry read it twice over breakfast, sitting at the kitchen table in number 4, Privet Drive, which he was using for approximately the last 2 weeks before he turned 17 and the Dursleys' obligation to house him expired entirely. Uncle Vernon had already started leaving estate agent brochures on his pillow, which Harry found more amusing than offensive. He sent a reply the same morning and was at the white marble steps of Gringotts by noon the following day, Hermione on his left and Ron on his right, because that was simply how they moved through the world now. Irregularity could mean anything, Hermione said, consulting the letter for the 4th time as they crossed Diagon Alley. Goblin legal language is extremely precise. Matter of inheritance is interesting. That's different from unclaimed assets. It implies lineage recognition. It implies something's in a vault that shouldn't be, Ron said. Which is either really good or really bad. Both, probably, Harry said. The bank's interior was cool and busy in the way it always was, goblins moving with purpose behind the long counter, the distant rumble of cartwheels on rails somewhere below the marble floor, the particular quality of silence that very old stone buildings have, the kind that absorbs sound and keeps it. Harry had always liked Gringotts despite himself. There was something honest about a place that was purely and unapologetically about what things were worth. Griplock met them at the far end of the counter. He was older than any goblin Harry had dealt with before, his skin was the color of old leather, his eyes sharp and dark and carrying that particular quality of accumulated judgment that very old creatures develop. He looked at Harry the way someone looks at a document they've been asked to authenticate, assessing rather than greeting. Mr. Potter, he said. Thank you for coming promptly. Please follow me. My friends, Harry started. May accompany you, Griplock said, which surprised Harry enough that he almost missed a step. Goblins didn't usually extend invitations voluntarily. What we are doing today will benefit from witnesses. That stopped Hermione mid-step. What exactly are we doing today? Griplock glanced at her with something that might, in a goblin, have passed for approval. We are performing a curse-breaking ritual, he said. A standard Gringotts procedure for vaults with secured magical locks. Your vault requires one because the lock on the secondary chamber has not been opened since 1483. The cart ride down was longer than Harry remembered. They went past the level where Vault 687 sat, he recognized the turnoff, and continued descending, the air growing heavier and older feeling, the rock walls narrowing and then widening again. Ron gripped the side of the cart with knuckles that were slightly white. Hermione had her notebook out. 1483, she said to Griplock, who sat across from them with the stillness of a man who had ridden this route 10,000 times. That predates the current ministry by nearly 2 centuries. It predates many things, Griplock agreed. What's in the secondary chamber? Harry asked. We don't know, Griplock said. That is, in part, why we require the ritual. The primary vault, your standard vault, number 687, was established by your grandparents in 1942. The secondary chamber predates it entirely. It was sealed into the rock when this section of the bank was first excavated. When our auditors reviewed the geological magical signatures last month, he paused, something shifting in his expression that Harry couldn't quite read. We discovered that the secondary chamber is keyed exclusively to your bloodline, Mr. Potter. No other magical signature will open it. Not even Goblin-made tools. Not even, Ron started. Not even, Griplock confirmed. The cart stopped at a landing Harry had never seen before. The tunnel here was different, older, the walls carved rather than drilled, the stone itself a darker color. Torches burned in brackets that looked as though they'd been burning for centuries without anyone tending them, the flames a deep amber rather than orange. At the end of the landing was a door. Harry had seen impressive doors in his life. The door to the Chamber of Secrets. The door to the Department of Mysteries. The door to Dumbledore's office. This was different. It wasn't trying to impress anyone. It was simply a door in ancient stone, iron-banded, and it had a quality that Harry couldn't name, a sense that it had been waiting very specifically and very patiently, and that waiting was now over. The curse-breaking ritual, Griplock said, moving to the door and producing a leather case from his robes, is designed to identify the blood heir of the vault, confirm their identity against the magical record, and dissolve any locks that would otherwise prevent access. It's a relatively minor procedure in most cases. A matter of a drop of blood on the keystone, a verbal confirmation, and perhaps a brief display of hereditary magic to establish lineage continuity. And in less minor cases? Hermione asked. Griplock opened his leather case and removed a small curved blade that glinted copper in the torchlight, a flat stone about the size of a hand, and a vial of something dark and viscous that Harry thought might be older than the corridor they were standing in. In less minor cases, the Goblin said carefully, the vault may respond beyond what is strictly necessary for identification. He said it in a tone that suggested he was technically providing full disclosure while also very deliberately not elaborating. That's not ominous at all, Ron said. Mr. Weasley, Griplock said without looking at him, you may wish to stand back a few paces. Ron immediately moved back 3 paces. Hermione moved forward 1. Harry stood where he was. The ritual was, in its physical components, almost anticlimactic. Griplock spoke in gobbledygook for perhaps 2 minutes, his voice low and rhythmic, nothing that sounded like spellwork in the way Harry understood it. More like recitation. He poured the dark liquid from the vial across the threshold of the door, and it spread across the stone in a thin film and didn't drip down the way liquid should, it moved as if it were reading the floor, exploring. He placed the flat stone against the iron-bound wood of the door. He turned to Harry. Your hand, he said. Harry held it out. Griplock drew the copper blade across his palm, quick, practiced, barely stinging, and pressed Harry's bleeding hand flat against the keystone. What happened next was not brief. The first thing Harry felt was warmth, which was what he expected. Blood magic typically felt warm in the way that any recognition of self did. Then the warmth became heat and the heat became something else entirely, a sensation of depth that had nothing to do with temperature, as if something had reached down through his skin and was examining everything underneath it, not just blood and bone but the magical architecture of him, the structure of his power, all the places where it connected to things older than himself. The door didn't open. The entire corridor changed. The carved stone walls lit up. Not with torches or with any visible light source, the stone itself became luminous, and in that luminescence Harry could see that the carvings he'd barely noticed on the walls weren't decorative. They were text. Lines and lines of text in a script that was simultaneously unreadable and somehow deeply familiar, as though he'd known it before he knew language. Griplock stepped back. He stepped back the way a person steps back from something they had intellectually prepared for and have now discovered is significantly larger than prepared for. His expression, and this was the thing Harry would think about later, lying awake in the Dursley spare room, turning it over. His expression was not afraid. It was reverent. "What is that writing?" Hermione whispered. She'd moved forward again without seeming to realize it, her notebook pressed to her chest. "The Founder's tongue," Griplock said quietly. "The original magical language of the British Isles, older than Latin, older than the runic systems. It was used for one purpose and one purpose only in the known historical record." He paused. "Foundation rites." "Foundation rites," Harry repeated. His hand was still on the door. He couldn't have moved it if he'd tried, not because anything was holding him, but because moving it felt wrong in the way that stepping away from a fire in a snowstorm feels wrong. "For what kind of foundation?" "The kind," Griplock said, "that you only lay once. The kind meant to last 1,000 years." The door opened. It didn't swing or slide. The stone around the frame simply dissolved, the iron bands folding away as though they'd been made of paper, and beyond it was a chamber that made Harry's breath catch in a way that had nothing to do with awe and everything to do with recognition. The chamber was not large. It was perhaps the size of McGonagall's classroom, the ceiling low and arched, and it was empty of gold or jewels or any of the things one expected to find in a Gringotts vault. Instead, the floor was one continuous mosaic, four distinct patterns flowing into each other, a lion and a snake and an eagle and a badger, laid in tile that was every color and no color depending on where the light touched it, and at the center of the mosaic, where the four patterns converged, was a plinth of black stone about waist height with a single object resting on it. It was a ring. Simple. Heavy-looking. A band of metal that was darker than silver and brighter than iron, set with a stone that was deep red and moved when Harry looked at it, or rather, the light in the stone moved, slow and deliberate, as though something inside it was breathing. "What is it?" Ron asked from the doorway. He hadn't come inside. Harry noticed that Ron's voice was completely flat, the tone he used when he was genuinely uncertain whether something was dangerous and was trying not to show it. "It's the Heir's ring," Hermione said. She'd moved into the chamber and was crouching at the edge of the mosaic, examining the tilework with wide eyes. Harry, look at this. The pattern isn't just decorative. The four houses, they're not separate. They're interconnected. Look how the lion's mane becomes the snake's coils here at the junction. This is a unity symbol. A sovereignty symbol." "Miss Granger is correct," Griplock said. He'd come to stand in the doorway, and he had not, Harry noticed, crossed the threshold. Gringotts has held that ring for 543 years. It was deposited here in 1483 by the last living descendant of the founder line, a woman named Ignotia Peverell Gryffindor, who came to us when she understood she was dying without an heir and asked us to hold it against the day her line would continue. Harry looked at Griplock. "Peverell," he said. "Your grandmother on the Potter side carried Peverell blood," the Goblin said. "Diluted. Distant. But the ring doesn't care about dilution, Mr. Potter. It cares about continuity." A pause. "And about the other inheritance. The one that comes through your mother's line." The chamber was quiet except for the sound of their breathing. "My mother's line," Harry said slowly. "My mother was Muggle-born." "Your mother," Griplock said, "carried a magical inheritance that predated the term Muggle-born entirely. That is a conversation for another day, and a longer one. What matters now is," he stopped. In the corridor outside, the amber torches had changed. They were white now, burning white and very bright, and the writing on the walls was blazing, line after line of Founder's tongue lit like a beacon. "What matters now," Griplock said, and his voice had changed too, lower, more formal, with a gravity that Harry hadn't heard before, "is that you take the ring." "I'm not going to be compelled to do anything," Harry said. "You are not being compelled," Griplock said. "You are being invited. There is a considerable difference, and the magic involved here understands the distinction very well." Harry looked at the ring. He walked to the plinth and stood over it and looked at the stone and the way the light moved inside it. He could feel magic coming off it the way he could feel heat off a fire, not threatening, not demanding. Present. Attentive. Waiting. He picked it up. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then Gringotts shook. Not an earthquake, not structural, no dust falling, no cracks appearing. The shaking was entirely magical, a vibration in the air itself, and the writing on the walls of the corridor blazed so brightly that the light came through the stone walls into the vault and filled it from floor to ceiling. Harry felt it pass through him like a sound that was too low to hear but that the body registered anyway, a resonance that moved from his feet up through his spine and into the top of his skull and then outward in every direction at once. In the cart bay above them, a goblin named Sharpclaw dropped his quill. 3 floors up, in the upper vault levels, a family of witches completing a routine withdrawal all turned toward the floor at the same time without knowing why. At the front counter, the great double doors of Gringotts swung open of their own accord and admitted a wash of summer sunlight from Diagon Alley, and every goblin behind the counter straightened simultaneously, not because they'd been told to, but because something very old in them recognized a signal that hadn't been given in living memory. In the vault below, Harry stood with the ring on his finger and felt the magic settle around him the way water finds its level. It wasn't a surge of power. It wasn't lightning or fire or any of the dramatic things he'd been bracing for. It was more like a door opening inside a room he'd been standing in his whole life, a room he'd thought he knew completely, and discovering that the room was 3 times as large as he'd believed, and all the space that had been hidden was his. Hermione was staring at him. Her mouth was slightly open. "Harry," she said. "Yeah," he said. "You're glowing." He looked at his hands. He was, mildly, a faint luminescence, the same deep amber as the old torches had been, running along the lines of his veins like something seen through thin paper. It faded as he watched, leaving nothing visible behind. But he could still feel it. The depth. The presence. The sense of something immense attending to him. "Griplock," he said, turning to the goblin in the doorway. Griplock had done something that Harry had never, in all his years of visiting Gringotts, seen a goblin do. He had bowed. Not a head dip or the slight incline that goblins gave to significant customers. A full, formal bow, spine parallel to the floor, held for 5 full seconds. When he straightened, his expression was the most complex thing Harry had ever seen on a goblin's face, satisfaction and solemnity and something almost like relief, as though he'd been carrying a very long-standing obligation and had just, finally, been released from it. "Griplock," Harry said again, and something in his voice was different and he couldn't explain how, only that he could hear it. "Tell me what I need to know." The goblin met his eyes. "Everything, sir," he said. "I will tell you everything. But we'll need a larger room." They used the conference room on the ground floor, a room Harry had never known existed, through a door behind the main counter that Griplock unlocked with a key he wore on a chain at his wrist. The room had a long table of dark wood and chairs with high backs, and a fireplace, and 3 other goblins who were already seated when they arrived, as though they'd been expecting this summons. Ron acquired tea from somewhere. This was one of Ron's reliable skills: in any building, in any situation, he could find tea. He set it on the table without comment, sat down, and folded his arms in the manner of someone prepared to receive a great deal of information and process it calmly. Hermione had her notebook open before she sat down. Harry sat at the head of the table, which he hadn't planned. It was simply the seat he'd moved toward, and immediately understood, from the way Griplock and the other 3 goblins adjusted their postures, that this was not an accident. The table had a head for a reason. And the ring was warm against his finger. The Founder's Compact, Griplock began, is not widely known in wizarding circles because the wizarding world has, over several centuries, developed a number of comfortable myths about its own history that it prefers to the truth. The truth, Mr. Potter, is this: when Godric Gryffindor, Salazar Slytherin, Rowena Ravenclaw, and Helga Hufflepuff founded Hogwarts, they did not simply build a school. They constructed a magical entity. Hogwarts, the physical structure, the wards, the magic within the walls, is a living magical construct. Not sentient in the way a person is sentient, but aware. Aware in the way a very old contract is aware of whether its terms are being honored. The wards respond, Hermione said. Everyone knows the castle has responsive magic. The moving staircases, the rooms that is surface function, one of the other goblins, younger, with quick eyes, said. What Mr. Griplock is describing is the architecture beneath the surface. The founders did not merely build a school. They bound it. They put their combined magic into the foundations and they sealed that magic against a specific succession of power. Meaning? Harry said. Meaning Hogwarts has always been waiting for a single inheritor, Griplock said. The school's magic, not its tricks and its responsive quirks, but its actual power, the accumulated magical energy of 1,000 years of human learning and growth and struggle and sacrifice that those walls have absorbed, that power has a steward. A designated heir. And the succession is not dependent on family lines in the simple sense. The founders understood that bloodlines dilute, that families die. So they encoded the inheritance differently. He folded his hands on the table. They encoded it in pattern. Pattern, Harry repeated. You carry blood from each of the founder lines, Hermione said quietly, looking up from her notebook. She'd been writing rapidly, but she stopped now. Don't you? That's what Griplock means. Not a direct descent from any one of them. A convergence. Griplock looked at her with genuine respect. In all the years I have been preparing for this meeting, he said, I had imagined explaining this part would take considerably longer. Lily Potter, Harry said, working it through. You said her magical inheritance predated Muggle-born as a category. She carries one of the founder lines. Hufflepuff, through an unbroken matrilineal sequence of magical women who were classified as Muggle-born for 10 generations because the line passed through non-magical families, Griplock said. The magic remained dormant in those women and emerged at full strength in Lily Evans. Your maternal line, Mr. Potter, traces directly to Helga Hufflepuff. The room was very quiet. And my father's side, Harry said. Gryffindor, obviously. And the Peverells. Where do the Peverells fit in the founder succession? The Peverells, Griplock said, were Salazar Slytherin's maternal nephews. The Peverell brothers were Slytherin's heirs in the same way that you are now theirs. Which means that the ring you are wearing is not only a Gryffindor inheritance object. Harry looked at the ring. The red stone moved gently in its setting. That's 3, Ron said. He'd been quiet for a long time, listening with the focused attention he gave to chess problems. What's the 4th? Ravenclaw. Your mother's grandmother, Griplock said, on her mother's side, was a woman named Clara Boot. The Boot family is a direct, if distant, Ravenclaw offshoot. It is the weakest of the 4 connections and the most diluted, but the magical pattern requires convergence, not purity. All 4 rivers must reach the sea. The measure is not depth but presence. Harry spread his hand on the table and looked at the ring. So I'm the heir. You are the heir, Griplock said. What does that mean, practically? Harry asked. What can I actually do? Griplock and the 3 other goblins exchanged a look. That, Griplock said carefully, is something we suggest you discover at Hogwarts rather than here. Gringotts is a bank, Mr. Potter. We deal in what can be measured and held and transferred. What you have inherited is somewhat larger than our accounting systems are designed to handle. Somewhat larger, Harry said. We have been managing a trust account, Griplock said, and the faint, dry precision of his delivery had something underneath it that might, if you listened carefully, have been a goblin's version of awe. We were unaware, for 500 years, that we were also managing a throne. Hermione's quill went still on the parchment. Ron set down his tea. Right, Harry said. He looked at the ring. He looked at Griplock. The compact, he said. You mentioned it in there. The Founders' Compact. What is it? A binding agreement, Griplock said. Encoded into the magic of Britain at the moment of Hogwarts' founding. Every practitioner of magic in these islands who draws power, who uses it, who builds their practice on it, does so on a foundation that Hogwarts provides. The Founders understood this. They made it formal. They wrote it into the fabric of the magical world. And? Harry said, because there was clearly more. And, Griplock said, the compact has a governance clause. It was designed with the understanding that power without accountability is catastrophic. The Founders had seen it already, in their own time, dark practitioners who used magic as a weapon, as a tool of domination, who corrupted what magic was meant to be. The compact states, in language that is binding at the level of magic itself rather than at the level of law or social convention, that any practitioner who pursues power through domination, terror, and the corruption of the magical world's foundations, any practitioner, in other words, who qualifies by the Founders' definition as a Dark Lord, does so in violation of the compact. And the heir of Hogwarts, Harry said slowly, is the compact's enforcer. Griplock inclined his head. Which means, Harry said, that Voldemort isn't just my enemy. He's in breach of contract. An elegant way to frame it, one of the younger goblins said. Technically and legally precise. Yes. Can I summon him? Harry asked. The question landed in the room with remarkable lightness given what it meant. The compact, can the heir compel compliance? Force attendance? In theory, Hermione said, looking up from her notebook. She'd been cross-referencing something in her memory at high speed. Harry could see it happening in her eyes. But Harry, this is what I need to understand before anything else. The compact would have been in effect since Hogwarts' founding. But no heir has acted on it before. Why? Because there has been no complete heir before, Griplock said. The pattern was incomplete until this generation. There have been individuals with one or two of the bloodline connections, individuals who held some of the castle's magical authority. But the full convergence, all four founder lines meeting in a single person, has not occurred in the history of the school. Until now, Ron said. Until now, Griplock confirmed. Harry was quiet for a moment. He was doing the thing he'd learned to do, not from any teacher, but from years of situations that required fast, clear thinking when the alternative was death, where he set aside everything that was emotionally enormous and concentrated on the next practical question. The ring, he said. What does it do specifically? It's the interface, Hermione said, still scribbling. Isn't it? Between Harry and the castle. The heir's ring is how the magic of Hogwarts recognizes its steward and allows them to access the full function of the school. Correct, Griplock said. Without the ring, you are a man with remarkable magical potential and a complex hereditary claim. With the ring, you are the castle's steward. The wards respond to you. The magic within the stones responds to you. The compact's enforcement provisions are available to you. And, he paused. And those who have built their power on the corruption of Britain's magical foundations will feel it. May already be feeling it. The resonance that moved through the bank when you took the ring, it did not stop at Gringotts' walls. Harry thought about Voldemort in his current state, rebuilding, regrouping, his Horcruxes still unaddressed for the most part, his Death Eaters scattered across Britain. He thought about the particular quality of magical attention that had moved through him when he picked up the ring, that outward pulse, that declaration of presence. He already knows something happened, Harry said. Something, Griplock agreed. He will not yet know what. The compact's full implications will reveal themselves when you go to Hogwarts and connect with the castle directly. But the pulse, yes. Anyone with sufficient sensitivity to magic's deep currents would have felt something shift. Good, Harry said. Hermione looked at him. Ron looked at him. The goblins looked at him. His voice had been entirely calm. Not reckless, not aggressive, just clear. Settled. The way someone sounds when they've been uncertain about the rules of a game their entire life and have just, finally, been told what they actually are. Good? Ron said. He's been afraid of me since I was a baby, Harry said. He's spent 15 years trying to deal with something he didn't understand and couldn't kill. Now he's going to feel a pulse of magic older than anything he's ever touched, and he's going to know it came from me, and he's going to be right. He looked at Griplock. I want all the documentation. Everything Gringotts has on the compact, the heir's inheritance, the succession records. Everything. Prepared and ready for you, Griplock said, and produced a document case from beneath the table that was clearly not a thing he had assembled after their arrival. It had been there, waiting, for a very long time. He slid it across the table to Harry, and there was something in the gesture, smooth, deliberate, final, that was more than a bank manager delivering papers to a client. It was a steward passing something to its rightful owner. Harry took the case. He stood. The ring caught the firelight and the red stone moved, slow and breathing. One more question, he said. Sir, Griplock said. When you bowed, Harry said, that wasn't a banking gesture. Griplock met his eyes. No, he said. It was not. Gringotts has held that vault and those documents and that ring for 543 years. We are not a sentimental institution, Mr. Potter. We do not deal in sentiment. A pause. But we deal in recognition. And we recognize what you are. Harry nodded once. He picked up the document case and turned toward the door, and Ron fell into step on his right and Hermione on his left, already sorting through her notes, already planning, already 3 questions ahead. In the corridor outside the conference room, one of the younger goblins had positioned himself near the door. As Harry passed, the goblin straightened and gave the same bow that Griplock had, full, formal, unhurried. Then another, farther down the hall. Then, at the main counter when they emerged into the banking floor, a gradual, rippling acknowledgement moving down the long line of goblins, not performed in unison, nothing orchestrated, each one individual, each one genuine. By the time Harry reached the great front doors of Gringotts, every goblin in the building's ground floor had bowed. The afternoon light of Diagon Alley hit them as they came down the marble steps. The street was busy, oblivious, witches and wizards going about their Tuesday. Okay, Ron said, when they were clear of the steps. Okay. So. You're the heir of Hogwarts. Apparently, Harry said. And Voldemort is technically in violation of a 1,000-year-old magical contract. Apparently. And the most powerful bank in the wizarding world just collectively bowed to you. They did. Ron was quiet for a moment. Mate, he said, I don't think the summer homework is going to feel very important anymore. Hermione made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and something more complicated. She was holding her notebook against her chest, and her eyes were very bright, and she was looking at Harry with an expression he'd seen on her face before only when she'd found the exact right answer to a question that had been troubling her for weeks. We go to Hogwarts, she said. Not September 1st. Now. As soon as we can arrange it. McGonagall will love that, Ron said. McGonagall, Harry said, is going to have much bigger things to think about than our summer holidays. He turned the ring on his finger. The stone moved in its setting, deep and red and patient, and somewhere beneath the streets of London, in the ancient tunnels of Gringotts, the text in the founder's tongue was still glowing on the walls of the corridor outside the vault that had waited 500 years for its heir to come home. And somewhere else, in a dark house in a village called Little Hangleton, in a cold upper room where a man who had remade himself into something less and more than human sat in a high-backed chair and pressed his fingers to his temples, Voldemort opened his eyes with an expression that had not crossed more actions request aborted. Write the next chapter now. Chapter 2, What the Stone Remembers. McGonagall said no 3 times before she said yes. The first no came by owl, the morning after Gringotts, when Harry's letter arrived at Hogwarts while she was taking breakfast in the staff room. It was a brief no, polite, firm, citing ministry regulations about student access to Hogwarts outside the academic term, and signed with the particular emphatic underline she reserved for decisions she expected to be challenged. The second no came that afternoon, when Harry flooded her directly from the leaky cauldron using the emergency contact protocol Dumbledore had established in 5th year. This no was longer and less polite, and included the phrase "I am not running a hotel, Mr. Potter," which Ron thought was quite good and said so. The third no came the following morning and lasted approximately 40 seconds before Harry said, "Minerva, I need you to listen to me. I need you to set aside everything you think you know about why I might be asking this and actually listen." And something in his voice, that new quality, the one he'd first heard in the Gringotts conference room, the one that was his own voice and also somehow older, made her go quiet on the other end of the fluke connection. He told her about the vault. About the ring. About Griplock's bow, and the corridor of blazing text, and the Founder's Compact. He told her everything, concisely and without embellishment, while Hermione held up the relevant pages of the Gringotts documentation so he could reference specifics. McGonagall was silent for a very long time after he finished. "How soon can you be at Hogsmeade Station?" she said. The Hogwarts Express wasn't running, it was July, the tracks were quiet, the platform at King's Cross utterly ordinary, so they took a ministry portkey from the leaky cauldron to the edge of Hogsmeade, arriving in a field of summer grass with the mountains behind them and the lake visible in the middle distance, blue and still in the afternoon heat. Harry had seen Hogwarts from this approach 100 times. The walk up from Hogsmeade, the castle growing as you came closer, the way it resolved from a silhouette into something enormous and specific, towers and battlements against the sky, the Quidditch pitch off to the left, the greenhouses clustered at the base of the slope. It looked the same. It looked entirely the same. And yet, from the moment he stepped off the portkey and turned toward it, Harry understood that something was different. Not in the castle. In him. In the way the castle registered on him, the way a room feels different when it's yours, when you're not a visitor but the person who belongs there. "You've gone quiet," Ron said, coming up beside him. "I can feel it," Harry said. "From here." "The wards." Ron looked at him, then looked at the castle. "What do they feel like?" Harry thought about it. "Like home," he said. "But the version of home where you actually own the house." McGonagall was waiting at the main gates. She was in full teaching robes despite the heat, her hat at its characteristic precise angle, and she was watching Harry approach with an expression he'd never seen her wear before. It took him a moment to identify it because it was so fundamentally unlike her usual mode, the controlled approval, the crisp assessment, the affection that always kept itself at arm's length because she was a teacher and he was a student and there were rules about that. What she was wearing now was something closer to relief. She didn't say anything when he reached her. She looked at him, really looked, the way old practitioners look at magic rather than at the person containing it, and then her gaze dropped to the ring on his right hand, and she pressed her lips together very tightly for one moment. "Inside," she said. "All three of you." The castle opened to Harry. This was not a metaphor. As the main doors of Hogwarts swung wide to admit them, Harry felt the wards recognize him the way a dog recognizes its owner, not the guarded, checking recognition of a security system verifying a password, but something immediate and eager and ancient, a consciousness that was not human but was absolutely attentive. The stones under his feet and the walls on either side of him and the air in the entrance hall all registered his presence in some way he felt in his chest rather than on his skin. Hermione glanced at him sideways as they walked in and said nothing, which meant she was storing up a significant number of observations for later. McGonagall led them up through the castle, past the marble staircase, up 2 flights, along a corridor Harry had walked 1,000 times, and he noticed things he'd never noticed before. The portraits, some sleeping in the summer heat, others watching curiously. One old wizard in a gilded frame straightened abruptly as Harry passed, leaning forward with wide eyes. A painted medieval knight lowered his lance in a gesture that was unmistakably formal. They can feel it too, Hermione murmured. The portraits have enough residual magical awareness to pick up on significant inheritance signatures, McGonagall said without turning around. They've been doing that all morning, actually, since dawn. Peeves has been entirely silent, which frankly terrifies me more than anything else you've told me. Peeves is silent? Ron said. Peeves, McGonagall said, has been a poltergeist in this castle for 400 years through 12 headmasters, 3 wars, and 1 genuinely catastrophic incident involving Dumbledore's brother and a goat that I refuse to discuss. I have never heard him go quiet before. She took them to the headmistress's office. Not a professor's office, not the staff room, the headmistress's office, which had become hers after Dumbledore's death and which still bore the marks of several different personalities accumulated over many occupants. The desk was McGonagall's, ruthlessly organized, 3 stacks of parchment at perfect right angles, but the walls held portraits of every headmaster and headmistress Hogwarts had ever had, 50 or more frames filling the space from floor to ceiling, and every single one of them was awake. Every single one of them was looking at Harry. The murmuring that broke out as he entered the room was not quiet. Portraits leaned toward each other, whispered, pointed. A 16th-century headmistress Harry didn't know the name of actually climbed out of her chair to get a better look. And in the largest frame, in the position of prominence directly behind the headmistress's desk, Dumbledore's portrait. Albus Dumbledore looked at Harry Potter with blue eyes that were, even in paint, the most expressively complex thing in the room. Not the familiar twinkle, not the grandfatherly warmth, not even the sorrow that had been in them the last few times Harry had seen the real man alive. What was in them now was simpler and more honest than any of that. He looked, for the first time in Harry's experience, genuinely surprised. "Harry," he said. "Professor," Harry said. "You found the vault." "Gringotts found it for me, technically." Dumbledore exhaled, an odd thing to see a portrait do, but the magic was good enough that it read clearly. "I suspected," he said. "For several years I suspected. But I could never be certain, because the bloodline convergence depended on your mother's hereditary magic being what I believed it was, and Lily was, she was never fully examined in that regard. She was Muggle-born and brilliant and extraordinary and he stopped. I should have looked harder. You should have told me more things," Harry said, without heat, because it was simply true. "But we can have that conversation another time. Right now I need to understand what happens when I engage the castle directly. The ring. What do I do with it?" McGonagall sat behind her desk. The other portraits were still murmuring. Dumbledore's portrait folded its painted hands and assumed the look of someone organizing information carefully. "There is a room," Dumbledore said. "Below the main structure. Older than anything else in the castle, predating even the Great Hall. The founders built the school around it rather than within it, which should tell you something about its significance. It is called, in the oldest records, the Heart Room. I discovered references to it in my first decade as headmaster and spent rather a long time trying to locate it. I never did. Because it doesn't open for headmasters," Hermione said. "Correct, Miss Granger," Dumbledore said, with the particular warmth he'd always had for her. "It opens only for the heir. I believe that when Harry stands in that room with the ring, the castle's full function becomes available to him, the wards, the compact's enforcement mechanisms, the archived history of everything that has ever occurred within these walls. Hogwarts has been watching for 1,000 years, and it remembers everything it has ever seen. Can you tell me where it is?" Harry asked. "No," Dumbledore said, not apologetically. "But I don't think I need to." Harry looked at him. Then he understood. He closed his eyes for a moment, not performing concentration but simply paying attention, to the warmth in the ring, to the attending presence he'd felt since he walked through the gates, to the way the castle felt, this specific room within it, and then beneath the room, and further beneath that, a sense of depth and age that was like standing at the edge of a very deep well and knowing that the well knows you're there. He opened his eyes. "Hermione, Ron," he said. Stay here. Harry, Hermione started. The documentation from Gringotts, he said. Go through all of it. The section on the Compact's enforcement protocols specifically. I need to understand the mechanics before I use them. I need to know exactly what I can compel and how. He looked at her steadily. This matters more than coming with me. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she picked up the document case, sat down at the secondary desk McGonagall waved her toward, and opened it. Ron pulled up a chair beside her and put his feet on the edge of the desk. I'll make sure she eats, he said. She forgets. I do not forget, Hermione said, already reading. Harry turned to McGonagall. I'll be back. Mr. Potter, she said, and he stopped at the door. She was looking at him with that expression again, the one that wasn't her teacher face, wasn't her stern face, was something more than professional and less practiced. Take your time, she said. The castle has waited 1,000 years. It can wait another hour. Yes, Harry said. But I can't. He found the staircase behind a tapestry on the 3rd floor, not a hidden door with a trick latch, not a passage behind a moving step, just a staircase that was there when he looked for it, as though it had rearranged itself to be available. The stones were older here. The air was different, not cold, not damp, just deep, the way the air in old churches sometimes is, accumulative, as though centuries of significant moments have altered its chemistry. Down. Past one landing, then another. Below the dungeons, which Harry had always thought were the lowest part of the castle. Below even the lowest storage level, where barrels of potions' ingredients were kept. Further down than he'd known the castle went, and as he descended the quality of the magic around him intensified, building not with pressure but with presence, the attending warmth that the ring had started becoming something fuller and more articulate. The heart room announced itself not by visual cues but by the feeling that he'd arrived. One moment he was on a staircase, and then he was standing at the threshold of a circular room perhaps 30 feet across, with a floor of bare stone and a ceiling that was too high to see clearly, and 4 walls that were covered entirely, every inch, in writing. Not the Founder's tongue script from Gringotts, though that was present too, in one continuous band around the base of the walls. The rest was everything else. Latin, Greek, Old English, Middle English, runes, symbol systems Harry couldn't identify. The accumulated writing of 1,000 years, covering the walls of the room that was the heart of the school. And in the center of the room, a single chair. Not a throne, nothing decorated or imposing. A plain stone chair, wide and deep, worn smooth by what, Harry thought. By magical resonance, perhaps. By the weight of attention. By 1,000 years of the castle turning its awareness toward this seat and finding nobody in it. He walked to it and sat down. The room came alive. Not explosively, not dramatically, in the way that movie magic tends toward drama. It came alive the way a person comes awake, first awareness, then orientation, then presence. The writing on the walls lit, line by line, section by section, a soft light the color of candle flame moving from the base upward. The air moved, a circulation that had no visible source, and Harry felt the castle's attention, that attending presence he'd been feeling since the gate, sharpen and focus and center itself entirely on him. He felt the wards first. The entire network of magical protections that surrounded Hogwarts, the anti-apparition fields, the concealment charms, the defensive enchantments, the wards that detected hostile intent, the boundaries that kept the forbidden forest from pressing too close, the protections against external magical attack that had been layered and maintained and renewed by 500 years of headmasters. Harry felt all of it, simultaneously, like a man who has put his hand into a stream and felt the water come from everywhere at once. And he could change it. Not by thinking vaguely about changing it, by understanding, with a clarity that came not from study but from contact, exactly how each ward was constructed, where it was anchored, how it could be extended or tightened or redirected. The wards weren't a system that had to be operated from outside. They were an instrument, and the ring was the hand that played it. He didn't change anything yet. He was too careful for that. He'd learned that lesson from watching adults make decisions about magical systems they didn't fully understand, and he wasn't going to be the next person to touch something old and intricate and confident he knew better. He paid attention instead. He felt the shape of it. He let the castle show him what it wanted him to know. Then came the memories. This was what Dumbledore had meant, and it was nothing like he'd expected. Not a flood of images, not a pensive experience, not a vision. More like the way a building sometimes tells its own history, the marks on a doorframe where heights were measured, the worn patch of floor where feet have passed for decades, the particular discoloration of a wall where a fireplace once was. The castle's memory was structural. It was in its bones. And Harry could read it. Not every moment of 1,000 years, that would have been endless and consuming. He could navigate it. He could ask questions and the memory of the building answered them, the way a very good library answers you when you know what you're looking for. He asked about the compact, and the walls showed him its moment of creation, for people standing in this very room, hands joined, pouring combined magic into the foundations, and the moment when the magic took and the room blazed and the compact became part of the world structure and all four of them understood what they had done. He asked about enforcement. The answer was complex and it was simple. The enforcement mechanism of the compact did not function like a law backed by a police force. It wasn't external. It was constitutional, it was woven into the magic itself, which meant that any practitioner who violated it was already, structurally, in a condition of magical debt to the foundations they were drawing from. The heir's role was not to impose punishment. The heir's role was to make the debt visible. To call the debtor to account. To require, in the language of ancient magical contract, an acknowledgement. Dark Lords didn't kneel because the heir defeated them in battle. They knelt because the compact required it, and the compact was not optional, because it was not law. It was physics. Harry sat in the heart room for 2 hours. When he came back upstairs, the light in the corridors had shifted to late afternoon gold, warm and long and slanted, and he felt the difference in himself in his spine, in his shoulders, a settled weight that was not burden but ballast. He knew what he was, and what he could do, and what he was going to do. He heard the argument before he reached the headmistress's office. Hermione's voice, measured but insistent, the documentation is unambiguous, Professor Flitwick, the compact has enforcement provisions that are not contingent on ministry approval. Flitwick's voice, higher and more agitated than Harry had ever heard it, this is far outside my area of expertise. I'm not saying the documents are false, I'm saying the implications, and beneath both of them. A voice Harry recognized from the front counter of the Daily Prophet and did not enjoy hearing, the ministry must be informed immediately, there are protocols for discoveries of this magnitude and I will not be party to. Harry opened the door. The room had filled while he was gone. McGonagall was still behind her desk, and her expression had the specific controlled quality of someone who has been managing a situation that has developed faster than she would have preferred. Hermione and Ron were at their secondary desk, and Hermione had clearly been in an argument for at least an hour, which had given her cheeks high color and her eyes a particular brightness. Flitwick was near the window, looking agitated. Slughorn was in the corner looking thunderstruck and slightly ill. And by the door, with a quill vibrating at his side and the expression of a man who had stumbled into a considerably larger story than he'd been chasing, was Barnabas Cuff, the editor of the Daily Prophet, who appeared to have arrived without being invited. "Why is he here?" Harry said. "He fled in approximately 40 minutes ago claiming he had information about unusual magical events in Gringotts this morning," McGonagall said. "I should have sent him away immediately." "I'll go when I have what I came for," Cuff said. He was a heavy-set man with the permanently slightly flushed complexion of someone who ate too well and drank too often, and he had the journalist's instinct of looking at people rather than situations. He was looking at Harry with the specific hungry attention of someone who has been waiting for a front page. "The story of the decade, potentially the century, and you happen to be in a room you weren't invited to," Harry said, discussing things you weren't told, about events that aren't your business. He said it without aggression, without heat, without any of the awkward discomfort he used to feel talking to adults who outranked him socially or professionally. He said it the way you state a fact. That's a fairly specific set of choices. Cuff's quill paused. Something in his expression recalibrated, the story hunger adjusting for a variable he hadn't accounted for. Mr. Potter, he said. The public has a right to, the public will know everything I decide the public should know, Harry said, when I decide they should know it, and the way I decide to tell them. I have some experience with what happens when the prophet tells the wizarding world things I haven't had a chance to contextualize myself, and the results have ranged from unhelpful to actively dangerous. So. He held the door open. We'll be in touch. The quill's vibration stopped entirely. Cuff looked at Harry for a long moment. Then he looked at McGonagall, who offered him precisely nothing. He looked at Hermione, who was watching with the bright, interested expression of someone cataloging a notable behavioral event. He looked at the ring on Harry's hand, and something shifted in his face, a quick involuntary adjustment, the body recognizing something the mind was still working on. I'll be in touch with you, Cuff said, which was his version of retreating with dignity, and then he was gone through the flue. Flitwick let out a breath. How did you do that? He asked. I just said what was true, Harry said. Barnabas Cuff has not left a room voluntarily before the conclusion of an interview in 30 years, Flitwick said. He's famously relentless. Dumbledore could barely manage him. McGonagall made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Phileas, she said, I think we may need to revise some of our assumptions about what Mr. Potter can and cannot manage. Harry came into the room properly and sat down, not at the secondary desk but in the chair across from McGonagall's desk, which was the chair that visiting adults used, and nobody commented on it. I've been in the Heart Room, he said. The portraits on the walls, which had been murmuring among themselves, went quiet. Dumbledore's portrait leaned forward. And? McGonagall said. The compact is real and the enforcement mechanism is real, Harry said. I understand it now, directly, not from reading about it. And I know what the first step has to be. He looked at Hermione. You got through the enforcement protocols in the documentation? Most of them, she said. Harry, the summoning provision, it's extraordinary. The compact's language describes it as an acknowledgement requirement. You can compel the acknowledgement, but it has to be done from within Hogwarts. The castle is the mechanism. The ring is the authority. But you need both together. I know, he said. I need to write a summons. To Voldemort, Ron said flatly. To Tom Riddle, Harry said, who is in violation of the Founder's Compact, and who, under the terms of that compact, is required to appear before the heir of Hogwarts to account for it. He paused. And not just Riddle. Grindelwald's compact obligation is still active. He's imprisoned at Nurmengard, which means the summons will reach him there. His acknowledgement can be compelled remotely. The room was very still. Harry, McGonagall said, and her voice was careful in a specific way. When you say compelled, I mean it in the literal sense, Harry said. This isn't a legal filing. This isn't an invitation he can decline. The compact is not optional. It's structural. When I send a formal summons from Hogwarts with the heir's ring as the seal, he will feel it the same way everyone in that bank felt it when I picked up the ring. Except more specifically. More personally. He met her eyes. He's going to come, Professor. The question is whether I'm ready when he does. Professor Flitwick sat down suddenly, as though his legs had made a decision his brain was still catching up to. This is unprecedented, he said. The theoretical implications alone, the compact's existence changes the entire historical understanding of, we can be stunned later, Ron said pleasantly. What do we do now? Harry turned to Hermione. I need the exact compact language for the acknowledgement summons. The founder's tongue phrasing, not the translated version. The magic is in the original. I have it, she said, and held up a specific page. He looked at McGonagall. I'll need to formally activate the castle's warding protocols before I send the summons. I don't intend for Hogwarts to be unprepared. Whatever Voldemort state when he arrives, however he comes, with whoever he brings, the castle will be ready. You can do that? Slughorn said from the corner. It was the first thing he'd said since Harry arrived. He was looking at Harry with the expression he used when a student produced magic that exceeded the year's curriculum, that specific mixture of professional astonishment and social recalculation, because Horace Slughorn above all else knew the value of being close to the right people, and had spent a career developing the sense for who those people were going to be. Yes, Harry said simply. Slughorn made a sound that might have been a laugh. Well, he said. Yes, of course you can. And he sat back in his chair with the look of a man who has, after considerable investment, finally seen his stocks come right. Dumbledore's portrait was quiet. Harry looked at it. I want your advice, he said. Not your management. Not your strategy. Your advice. If you're willing to give it. The painted eyes moved, that very specific quality the portrait had, that made it feel genuinely inhabited rather than merely well-made. I'm honored to give it, Dumbledore said, and the simplicity of it was jarring after years of Dumbledore's layered, careful speech. I have made many mistakes in my management of this situation. I convinced myself that careful preparation, that shielding you until the right moment, that, he stopped. My advice, Harry, is this: do not do what I did. Do not manage this. Do not be cautious when directness is required. You know what you are now. Act like it. I intend to, Harry said. Outside the headmistress's window, the sun was going down over the mountains, turning the lake copper and orange, and the castle's evening light filled the corridors with the particular warmth that Hogwarts had always had in late afternoon, that quality of light that made students who had left and come back always say that Hogwarts looked like home, regardless of everything. Hermione slid the page across the desk to Harry. The text of the summons, in the founder's tongue, was 9 lines long. At the bottom, in parentheses, she had written in her precise handwriting, "Seal with the ring. Speak the recipient's true name. The castle will deliver it." His true name. Harry thought about that. Tom Marvolo Riddle. Born in a Muggle orphanage. Brilliant, driven, terrified of death and ordinary life in equal measure, and so he had chosen to become something that could be neither ordinary nor dead, had chosen to become a Dark Lord, had built an identity out of dominance and terror because the alternative was being unremarkable, and unremarkable had always felt, to Tom Riddle, like a kind of death. Harry understood this better than he ever had, sitting in the Heart Room, reading the castle's memory. Hogwarts remembered Tom Riddle. Remembered him arriving on a September 1st with fierce, hungry eyes and a quality of magical ability that the castle had noticed in the same deep, structural way it now noticed Harry. The difference between them was not talent. It was what they had done with it. It was the specific choices that had brought one of them to the Heart Room's chair and sent the other spiraling through Horcruxes and murder and the erasure of everything that had once been human. Harry pressed the ring to the bottom of the parchment. The stone blazed briefly, deep red, warm, certain, and left a seal in the ancient metal's impression that was not an image but a pattern, for interlocking symbols converging at a center point. Tom Riddle, he said. The parchment vanished. Not burned, not flown, vanished, the way things vanish in old stories, as though they've simply gone to where they were always going, by the most direct route. The castle hummed. Below their feet, in the Heart Room, Harry felt the ward network shift, a small, precise change, a single adjustment of the defensive architecture, the equivalent of a man who has been sitting comfortably in his own home hearing an unfamiliar noise and straightening, very slightly, in his chair. Ready. Alert. Watchful. Hermione let out a long breath. How long do you think before he responds? He won't respond, Harry said. He'll come. That's the point. There's no declining a formal summons under the compact. He leaned back in the chair. But I want to be clear on something before he does. He looked at the room, McGonagall, Hermione, Ron, Flitwick, Slughorn, and the crowded gallery of painted faces watching from their frames. When he comes, and when the others come, because it won't only be Riddle, it won't be a fight. I won't need to fight them. But I need everyone in this room to understand that whatever you expect from the encounter, the one thing you will not see is me being afraid of him. Of course not, McGonagall said. I mean it precisely, Harry said. Not as bravado. Not as a statement about my character or my courage. I mean it as a statement about the situation. He is in breach. He has no position of power here. He is a debtor who has been called to account, and the account he owes is to the magic itself, not to me personally, and not to any political or military force. To the foundations. The castle is older than his ambition and bigger than his power, and when he stands in front of me, he's going to feel that. The ring is going to make sure he feels it. Nobody said anything for a moment. Ron broke the silence, because Ron's particular genius was for the moment when a room needed to stop being serious before the seriousness curdled into something unproductive. Right, he said. In that case, can we eat? I haven't had anything since lunch and I'd like to face the Dark Lord on a full stomach. The tension in the room released, not explosively but steadily, like air from a valve, and McGonagall actually smiled, the real one, the one that only appeared on rare occasions, that completely changed the arithmetic of her face. The kitchens will be operational, she said, standing. Mr. Weasley, you have my permission to lead the way. As they moved toward the door, one by one the portraits on the walls settled. Dumbledore's among them, though it didn't close its eyes, it remained watching, with that expression of genuine surprise that had not left it since Harry walked in. Harry paused at the door and looked at the portrait. Dumbledore raised one painted hand in what might have been a benediction or might have been farewell or might have been, simply, a greeting offered to something he was finally seeing clearly. Harry nodded once and walked out into the corridor, where the evening light was doing what evening light did in Hogwarts, collecting in the corners, gilding the stone, making the castle look exactly like what it was, 1,000 years of human effort and hope and magic, all of it alive, all of it attending, all of it waiting for what came next. The summons had been sent. Somewhere in Britain, in whatever dark place Tom Riddle was rebuilding himself, the parchment had arrived. The compact had spoken. And Harry Potter, walking down the corridor toward the smell of dinner and the sound of Ron talking too loudly about what he intended to eat, felt the castle's warmth in the ring on his finger and thought, let him come. Chapter 3, The Compact of the Dark. The summons reached Voldemort at 3 in the morning. Harry knew this because the castle told him, not in words, not in vision, but in the same structural way the heart room communicated everything, a brief sharpening of the ward network's attention, a single pulse of the ring's warmth in the dark of the guest quarters McGonagall had opened for them, pulling Harry out of sleep with the same certainty as a hand on his shoulder. He lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, feeling the castle's quiet alertness around him like a held breath. Then he got up, dressed, and went to sit by the window that overlooked the lake. The water was black and still. The mountains were darker shapes against a dark sky. Somewhere out there, in whatever hollow of Britain Voldemort was currently occupying, a piece of parchment had appeared from nowhere, or hadn't appeared, actually, because the compact didn't work through physical objects. The parchment in the headmistress's office had been the vessel but not the message. The message had gone directly into the fabric of Tom Riddle's magical existence, the same way a debt doesn't need a letter to be real. You simply know you owe it. Harry wondered what it felt like. He sat with that for a while, genuinely curious rather than gleeful, trying to understand what it would be like to have built your entire identity around being the most powerful, the most feared, the most untouchable, and then to feel something tap you on the shoulder from a direction you didn't know existed. He thought about the castle's memory of Tom Riddle at 11, arriving with those fierce hungry eyes, and wondered what that boy would have made of this moment. Whether some part of Tom Riddle, the part that had been brilliant and driven before it had been consumed, would recognize what Harry carried and understand it as the thing he'd been searching for his whole life. Not power to be taken. Power to be recognized. The thing Voldemort had never found, because you cannot find something you've decided doesn't exist. He heard footsteps in the corridor around 4. A knock at the door. "Come in, Hermione." She came in carrying 2 mugs of tea, which meant she'd been in the kitchen for some time, which meant she'd been awake considerably longer than she was about to admit. She sat in the chair across from him and tucked her feet under her in a way that was entirely at odds with her public persona of relentless composure, and handed him a mug. "The summons landed," he said. "I know. I felt it too, slightly." The wards shifted. She wrapped both hands around her mug. "Harry, I've been reading the compact documentation since midnight. There are things I didn't get to yesterday that I think you need to know before anything else happens." "Tell me." She'd brought the documents. Of course she had. She unfolded a specific section, the pages covered in her annotations in 3 different ink colors, a system he'd never fully decoded but understood was meaningful. "The compact's enforcement provision doesn't just apply to Voldemort," she said. "You already knew that, Grindelwald, and historically anyone who qualified under the compact's definition of a Dark Lord. But the definition is specific, and it's broader than I initially thought. It's not about the scale of atrocities committed. It's structural." She found the passage and read aloud, "Any practitioner who draws the magic of these islands into the service of systematic domination, who establishes power through the deliberate corruption of the magical world's foundations, who builds authority on terror rather than recognition, such a practitioner enters the compact's governance automatically, regardless of intent or self-designation." "Regardless of self-designation," Harry repeated. "Which means," Hermione said, "that there are people currently operating in the wizarding world who are technically in breach of the compact and may not know it. Junior Death Eaters who've been performing acts that qualify. Minor dark practitioners. People who've been using magic in ways that the compact's founders would have classified as corruptive." She looked at him. "The summons you sent is specifically addressed to Voldemort. But the compact's acknowledgement requirement could technically be applied more broadly." "How broadly?" "I don't know yet. That's what I've been trying to determine." She set down the page and picked up another, this one with considerably more annotations, the margins dense with her handwriting. "But there's something else. Something about the compact that's been bothering me since I first read it." He waited. "The compact isn't punitive," she said. "That's what keeps striking me. It doesn't describe punishment. It doesn't describe a trial or a judgment or a sentence. The word it uses, consistently, is acknowledgement. What does that mean to you?" Harry thought about it. "The debt being seen," he said. "Not paid. Seen. Exactly. Which means the compact's purpose is not to destroy Dark Lords or imprison them or remove their power. It's to make them, what? To make them account for what they've done in the presence of something larger than themselves." She was quiet for a moment. "To make them reckon with the fact that all the power they used came from a source they didn't own and didn't build and are in violation of. Not to punish them. To humble them." Harry sat with that. "The kneel," he said. "The kneel," she confirmed. "The compact describes it. The acknowledgement takes the form of physical submission before the heir, not as theatrical gesture but as magical expression of the debt being recognized. The body doing what magic requires because magic requires it." She paused. "Voldemort is going to kneel, Harry. Not because you overpower him. Because the magic itself will require it of him, and he won't be able to stop it." Harry thought about Voldemort's face. The white skin and the flat nose and the red eyes that he'd seen first when he was 12 months old and had been seeing in various forms ever since, in dreams and visions and direct confrontations. The face that had become synonymous, for the wizarding world, with the ultimate in terror. He tried to imagine it, that face, the pride in those eyes, and the body underneath it folding against its will. He's going to hate that more than anything I could do to him, Harry said. Yes, Hermione said. Which is why I need you to understand something about what happens after the acknowledgement. She found the page. The compact's acknowledgement provision is binding. But it's not permanent subjugation. It's not enslavement. After the acknowledgement is given, the compact's terms are satisfied, for that instance. The Dark Lord is not stripped of power, not automatically imprisoned. They've acknowledged the debt. The magic accepts that. And then the heir has to decide what to do with them. Harry looked at her. That's the hard part, isn't it? That's the part I've been up since midnight thinking about, she said. Outside, the sky over the mountains had begun to shift from black to the deepest shade of blue, that specific pre-dawn quality of light that was not quite darkness and not yet morning. The lake caught it faintly. We should get Ron, Harry said. He's in the library, Hermione said. He's been there since 2. He found the historical records of the Founders' original deliberations. Someone transcribed them in the 15th century. They're in a section that hasn't been catalogued since Dumbledore's time. Harry stared at her. Ron is voluntarily in the library at 4 in the morning. He said, and I'm quoting directly, if Harry's going to be having a meeting with Voldemort, the least I can do is do some reading. And then he went and found things I hadn't found. She said it with the specific quality of someone who is simultaneously proud and slightly affronted. He has good instincts. He always has, Harry said. They went to the library. Ron had set up in the restricted section, not breaking in, but using the temporary authorization McGonagall had given all 3 of them for the duration of their visit, a small parchment note that he'd tucked into the cover of the book currently open in front of him. He had 3 other volumes stacked at his elbow and the expression of someone who had found something that mattered and was sitting with it carefully. The Founders' deliberations, he said, without preamble, as they sat down. Specifically Salazar Slytherin's contribution. He turned the transcription to face them. Everyone thinks of Slytherin as the villain of the founding. The one with the dangerous ideas about blood purity. And that's true, but that's not all he was. Look at this. Harry looked at the page. The transcription was in an archaic English that was difficult but navigable, and the section Ron was pointing to was a speech, or what had been transcribed as a speech, with editorial notation suggesting it was delivered during the final deliberation before the compact was sealed. Slytherin, on the question of the governance clause, we are not building a court. We are not appointing a king. We are writing a truth into the world, that magic is not something to be owned, and those who behave as though it is will one day be required to account for their error. The heir we describe is not a ruler. The heir is a reminder. A living, breathing reminder that the magic of these islands belonged to itself long before it belonged to any of us, and that anyone who forgets this, anyone who builds their power on the premise that they have mastered what cannot be mastered, will eventually stand before someone who proves otherwise. Not by force. By fact. Harry read it twice. Slytherin wrote the governance clause, Hermione said quietly. Almost entirely, Ron said. The other 3 contributed to the bloodline succession mechanics and the structural encoding. But the philosophical framework, the whole idea of the heir as a reminder rather than a ruler, that's Slytherin. Which is interesting because Voldemort considers himself Slytherin's heir, Harry said. Yeah, Ron said. And what he's actually going to get is Slytherin's correction. The 3 of them sat with that for a moment, in the silence of the library at 4:30 in the morning, while outside the windows the sky continued its slow transition toward dawn. There's more, Ron said, turning to another flagged page. The historical record of the one time the compact's acknowledgement was invoked before. 1217, a dark practitioner named Aldrich the Unbound. The records are a bit patchy but the gist is that he'd been building a power base in the Northern Highlands, systematic terrorizing of magical communities, torture, the works. The heir at the time was a woman named Aithen, she was the last complete heir before the bloodline fragmented. He found the passage. She summoned him under the compact. He came, apparently fighting it the whole way. The record describes it as him arriving in a condition of great fury and magical turbulence. And then he acknowledged the debt, in this room in the castle, and he knelt. What happened after? Harry asked. I didn't let him go, Ron said. Back into the world. With a binding on the specific corruption, she couldn't strip his magic, but the acknowledgement made the corruptive use of it structurally harder for him, the way a broken bone healed slightly wrong makes certain movements difficult. He never rebuilt to his previous level. Ron paused. The record notes that he came back 12 years later, voluntarily, and asked for a second audience. He apparently spent the intervening years thinking about what had happened and had some things he wanted to say about it. That's almost more remarkable than the kneel, Hermione said. That's the point of the acknowledgement, Harry said, and the pieces were assembling themselves as he spoke, the way they did when something he'd been turning over found its resolution. It's not about breaking them. The compact's design, Slytherin's design, isn't to destroy Dark Lords. It's to give them the experience of standing in front of something they cannot dominate, cannot manipulate, cannot outlast, and having to be honest about what they are. Some of them will just be furious about it and leave and go back to being what they are. But some of them might think, Ron said. Some of them might think, Harry agreed. He stood up, moving to the library window. Dawn was happening in earnest now, the first light coming over the mountains, catching the lake's surface. The castle was waking around him, he could feel it in the ring, the subtle shift as Hogwarts moved from its nighttime state to its daytime one, the wards settling into their active configuration, the attending presence brightening like an eye-opening. When does he come? Ron asked. I don't know exactly, Harry said. The compact gives a window of 3 days for the summons to be honored before the compulsion tightens. He has time to make choices about how he arrives. Whether he comes alone or with followers, whether he comes in fury or in calculation. He'll come in calculation. He turned from the window. He's too smart for fury. He'll have spent the time between the summons and his arrival working out every possible angle, every possible leverage point, every way to turn the situation to his advantage. Can he? Hermione asked. No, Harry said. But he doesn't know that yet. And honestly, he looked at the ring. I want him to try. I want him to come in with all his preparation and his strategy and his certainty that there's an angle he hasn't found yet. I want him to spend 3 days convinced there's a move he can make. Because the moment he's in this castle, under the compact, all of that evaporates, and that transition, that specific moment when Tom Riddle understands that his entire approach to the situation was wrong from the beginning, that's going to be more instructive than anything else I could say to him. Hermione and Ron looked at each other. Right, Hermione said. Then we have 3 days. We use them. They used them thoroughly. Day 1 was spent in the Heart Room, Harry working through the castle's deeper ward architecture with the deliberate care of someone learning an instrument, not just knowing what the keys did but understanding the logic of the composition, how the wards worked together, where the harmonics were and where the tensions were, which sections had been maintained recently and which were ancient and vast and running entirely on their own momentum. He found, in the deepest layer, something he hadn't expected. The castle had a defensive response that had never been triggered. Not a ward, not an enchantment, something older and more organic than either, a capacity for magical expression that was the accumulated power of 10 centuries of human learning and emotion and growth, all of it stored in the stone the way heat stores in rock, and the air was its only release valve. He sat with that for a long time, turning it over with the careful attention of someone who has found a weapon they didn't expect and is thinking seriously about whether to use it. He decided not to think of it as a weapon. Day 2 was meetings. McGonagall had been sending and receiving owls constantly, responses to the quiet inquiries she'd made to the Order, to trusted ministry contacts, to a handful of people in the wider wizarding world whose judgment she valued. The picture that assembled from these communications was that Voldemort was not behaving in his usual pattern. The Death Eater activity that had been escalating for months had paused. Not retreated, paused, which was different, and more unsettling. "He's pulled them in," Harry said, reading through McGonagall's summary. "Recalled his active operations. He's consolidating. Preparing for something," Hermione said. "Preparing for here," Harry said. "He's not going to come alone." Professor Flitwick, who had been in and out of the headmistress's office with increasing frequency, having apparently decided that his professional obligation to caution was outweighed by his personal inability to stay away from the most historically significant magical event of the century, looked up from a large volume of ward theory. "Can he bring followers onto the grounds?" he asked. "Under the compact, the summons is personal, it applies to him. But the Hogwarts wards, I've adjusted them," Harry said. A pause. "You've adjusted the Hogwarts wards," Flitwick said. "I'll let them through the outer perimeter," Harry said. "The Death Eaters. I want them here. If Voldemort brings his court, I want his court to see what happens. The compact's acknowledgement provision works best with witnesses." He picked up his tea. "I've also strengthened the inner wards to a level that means any hostile magical action from any of them will be reflected. Not blocked, reflected. They fire a curse in this castle and it comes back." The room was quiet. Flitwick started. "Is it possible?" McGonagall asked. "I did it this morning," Harry said. "It took about 2 hours." Slughorn, in his corner, made the noise again, that specific sound of a man watching a stock price climb past all previous records. He'd taken to bringing his own chair from his office, which Harry thought was funny. "There's one more thing," Harry said. He looked at McGonagall. "I need to send a second summons." "Grindelwald," she said immediately. "He's imprisoned. The compact can reach him at Nurmengard, but the acknowledgement is complicated when the subject is incarcerated. The compact's magic will compel the acknowledgement to happen remotely, through a proxy communication. I've worked out the mechanism, but it requires a witness here at Hogwarts who has a prior connection to Grindelwald." He paused. "Dumbledore's portrait." Every head in the room turned to the portrait. Dumbledore's painted face was very still. "You want me," the portrait said slowly, "to serve as the channel through which Gellert Grindelwald acknowledges his debt to the compact. The castle will maintain the magical link," Harry said. "The portrait just needs to be present and willing. But I thought I should ask." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment that was much longer than it needed to be if the answer was no. "Yes," he said. "Whatever it requires." And his voice was even, and his expression was composed, and only someone who had been watching him very carefully for the last 2 days, which Harry had been, would have seen the thing that moved behind his painted eyes when he said it. Not fear. Something older and more personal than fear. The particular expression of someone about to complete a task they have owed for decades. Day 3 arrived the way days arrive when something is coming, slightly surreal, the ordinary details of morning too vivid, the castle too quiet. Harry ate breakfast in the Great Hall, which McGonagall had opened for their small group, the 4 house tables empty around them and the enchanted ceiling above carrying a blue July sky with a few high clouds moving quickly. He ate eggs and toast and drank his tea and didn't feel nervous, which he had braced for and which wasn't arriving. What he felt was clear. Focused in the way he got in the moment before a Quidditch match, all the noise of everything that could go wrong dissolved into the specific, precise attention of someone who knows what they're doing and is about to do it. Ron was working through a second plate of toast. Hermione was rereading her notes for perhaps the 7th time, making small additions with a shortened pencil. "When today?" Ron asked. "Afternoon," Harry said. He could feel it, not a specific time, but a direction, the way you can tell rain is coming from the weight of the air. He'll have planned for afternoon. Arrives with the light at his back from the western approach, crosses the grounds with maximum theatrical impact. He's always had a sense of theater. You sound like you know him, Hermione said, not critically. I've been inside his head, Harry said. And I've been in the castle's memory of him. I know him in ways he doesn't know I know him. He paused. That's an advantage. What do you want us to do? Ron asked. When he arrives. Harry looked at him. I want you both with me. In the entrance hall, where he'll come in. I don't want this to happen in a private room or a formal chamber. I want it in the space that every student who has ever come to Hogwarts has stood in on their first day. I want it in the place that Tom Riddle himself stood when he was 11 years old and the castle first knew him. Ron nodded, the straightforward and immediate nod he gave when he'd understood something and agreed with it without needing it explained further. Hermione made a note. Then she looked up. Harry. After the acknowledgement. After Voldemort and Grindelwald have honored the compact. What do you do with Voldemort? The Horcruxes, Harry said. That's still the practical problem. The compact's acknowledgement doesn't unmake them. He's still functionally immortal until they're dealt with, and the acknowledgement doesn't change that. I've been thinking about that. He was quiet for a moment. The castle's deepest ward layer, the accumulated power I told you about. I think it can be used to expose them. All of them, simultaneously. The way a very bright light throws shadows. He looked at the ring. I think that's what it's for. Hermione stared at him. You think the Heart Room's power was always specifically designed to counter the kind of magic that creates Horcruxes? I think the founders understood that soul magic was the most dangerous corruption possible, Harry said. And they built a countermeasure. They just needed someone who could use it. That would make Voldemort mortal, she said. Suddenly. In the middle of this. I know, Harry said. He won't take that quietly. I know that too. They sat with it for a moment, the morning light moving across the empty tables, the ceiling's clouds drifting. Then Harry finished his tea, set down the mug, and stood up. I'm going to go sit in the Heart Room for a few hours, he said. I want to be settled when he arrives. Not prepared, settled. There's a difference. What's the difference? Ron asked. Harry thought about it. Prepared means you've thought of everything that might go wrong and have a plan for it, he said. Settled means you're ready for the things you haven't thought of, because you trust yourself to handle them. Ron pointed at him. That's the quote, right there, he said. Someone should write that down. Hermione already had. At 2:30 in the afternoon, the outer wards reported contact. Harry was in the entrance hall when he felt it, standing in the center of the stone floor, ring on his hand, the castle's full attending awareness gathered around him like a cloak. The high doors were closed. The marble staircase rose behind him. The 4 hourglasses in their niches were empty of gems, the school year long ended, and the hall had that specific quality of a stage before the performance, everything in its right place, the light correct, the air held. Hermione stood to his left. Ron to his right. McGonagall behind them, at the foot of the staircase. Flitwick beside her. A small gathering, by any measure. Harry felt the outer wards part. One presence, then a dozen, then more, he counted in the ring's awareness, the way you count sounds in a quiet room. Voldemort and perhaps 30 Death Eaters, moving across the grounds from the western approach. Exactly as he'd predicted. He felt the moment they crossed the inner threshold and the reflected ward engaged, felt the entire party flinch, like horses refusing a fence, as their own ambient magical energy bounced back at them. Not harmful, not disabling. Just honest. This magic was not theirs. It would not cooperate with them. The great doors opened. Tom Riddle walked in. He was wearing black robes that had the quality of something chosen for effect, and he moved with the physical grace that always sat wrong on someone whose body was so clearly remade and not naturally inhabited, too controlled, too precise, as though movement were something he had learned rather than something that came naturally to him. Behind him came a stream of Death Eaters in their masks, filling the entrance hall in silence, spreading out along the walls. His red eyes found Harry across the hall. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Voldemort smiled, that thin, cold expression that had never reached his eyes in the way that smiles were meant to, and said, "Harry Potter. You have certainly been busy." His voice was smooth and certain and deliberately light, the voice of a man who has decided the correct tone for this encounter is condescension, who has spent 3 days constructing an approach and this is its opening move. Harry looked at him. "Tom," he said. The name landed in the room like a stone in still water. Behind Voldemort, one of the Death Eaters shifted. Around the hall, in the stone walls, in the floor, in the high vaulted ceiling, the castle breathed. "The compact," Harry said. "You felt it since the summons. You know what it is. You know why you're here." He kept his voice even and conversational, as though they were discussing something they'd both read. "I'm going to ask you, as a courtesy, to acknowledge it willingly rather than waiting for the magic to require it of you. It'll happen either way. One is significantly less unpleasant than the other." Voldemort looked at him with those red eyes and for a brief, unguarded moment, so brief that only someone who had spent a year seeing through his eyes would have caught it, something moved in them that was not contempt, not anger, not calculation. It was recognition. He had felt the pulse from Gringotts. He had felt the summons arrive. He was intelligent enough to have understood, in those 3 days, that what he was dealing with was not a trick or a trap or an escalation of the familiar conflict. He understood what the ring was and what the heir meant and what the compact required. He had come anyway. He had come anyway because Tom Riddle did not have, in his psychological architecture, a functional response to things that could not be outmaneuvered. He could only keep advancing. "You are 17 years old," Voldemort said, and his voice was still smooth but there was an edge in it now, a pressure below the surface. "You are standing in a school. You are holding an old ring and quoting documents you found last week. And you expect me to kneel." "I expect the compact to require it of you," Harry said. "What you do between now and that moment is entirely your choice." The ring blazed. Not dramatically, not visibly, to any eye in the room. But Harry felt it, and from the way Voldemort's expression shifted, barely, a fraction, the faintest tightening around those red eyes, Voldemort felt it too. The warmth of the stone becoming something larger, the castle's accumulated presence gathering behind Harry the way a tide gathers behind a stone, quiet and enormous and entirely inevitable. Around the hall, the Death Eaters went very still. And the castle waited. Chapter 4, The Court of the Heir. The silence in the entrance hall had a texture to it. Harry had been in silences before, the silence before a duel, the silence of a room after someone has said something irreversible, the specific silence of a battle pausing between one moment of violence and the next. This was different. This was the silence of something very old paying attention to something it had been waiting a long time to see. Voldemort stood 12 feet away and the Death Eaters lined the walls and the castle breathed around all of them and Harry stood in the center of it like a man who had walked into a room and found it exactly the size he expected. "You've rewritten the wards," Voldemort said. He was looking at the walls, not admiring them, assessing them, the way a general reads terrain. "Extensively. This morning, I'd estimate. The castle's defensive architecture has been restructured at a fundamental level." He turned his red eyes back to Harry. "That's not something a 17-year-old does." "And yet," Harry said. "And yet." Voldemort moved, not toward Harry but to one side, a slow, deliberate arc, the way predators move when they're feeling for an angle. The Death Eaters adjusted slightly, a ripple of deference moving through them. "I've spent considerable time, Harry, thinking about what you've found. What Gringotts revealed. The heir's inheritance, the compact, the ring." He paused. "It's genuinely remarkable. The founders built something extraordinary. The accumulated magic of this castle is, I felt it when I crossed the threshold. Even from outside. It is very old and very large and very real. I know, Harry said. And yet, Voldemort said, and his voice was smooth again, that particular smoothness that meant he had arrived at what he'd been building toward, none of it changes the fundamental situation. You have inheritance. I have an army. He stopped moving. The compact requires acknowledgement, yes. What it does not require is that I find that acknowledgement agreeable, or that I cooperate with whatever you intend afterward. I can kneel, the magic will require it, eventually, I understand that, and then I can stand up and continue precisely as before. Is that what you think will happen? Harry asked. That's what the compact's text describes, Voldemort said. Acknowledgement, not subjugation. Recognition of debt, not payment of it. You've read the documents. Your friend Miss Granger has certainly read them, given the annotations I can see on the papers she's trying not to visibly hold. A thin smile. I have read them too. Extensively. I have had 3 days and considerable resources. Hermione, to her credit, didn't move. She was very still in the way she got when she was furious and managing it. Harry looked at Voldemort. You're right, he said. A pause. Behind Voldemort, the Death Eaters exchanged glances that were invisible under their masks but audible in the small shifts of their bodies. I'm right, Voldemort repeated, carefully. The compact doesn't subjugate you. It requires acknowledgement and then releases you. You've read it correctly. Harry tilted his head slightly. But you've missed something. Have I? The acknowledgement isn't just a formality. It's not a box to check. The compact was written by people who understood magic far better than anyone since, certainly better than you, which I know isn't something you enjoy hearing. Harry kept his voice even, not taunting, stating. The acknowledgement is a magical event. It changes the person who gives it. Not their power, not their freedom, their understanding. You'll give the acknowledgement and you'll know something afterward that you don't know now, and that knowledge isn't reversible. Voldemort was very still. What knowledge, he said. What it feels like, Harry said, to stand in front of something you didn't build and can't own. What it feels like to draw from a source that was here before you and will be here after you. What it feels like, he paused. What it feels like to not be the most powerful thing in the room. The silence extended. Then Voldemort said, very quietly, Crucio. The curse hit the air between them and stopped. Not blocked, stopped, the way water stops when it runs out of slope, the reflected ward catching it at the boundary of the castle's active protection and folding it back toward its origin. Voldemort stepped sharply to one side, avoiding the return, his composure fracturing for one clean second into something more honest, surprise, genuine surprise, the face of a man who has cast that spell hundreds of times and never had it refuse to travel. The Death Eaters erupted. Not in coordinated attack, in the fractured, panicked way that people move when the rules they understood turn out to be wrong. Curses flew from a dozen directions, all of them hitting the reflected ward and bending back, and the entrance hall became briefly, extraordinarily loud, the sound of spells crackling and reversing, bodies diving, masks hitting the stone floor as people threw themselves flat. Harry didn't move. He stood in the center of it and let the castle handle it, because that was what the wards were for, and they were very good at their job. He watched Voldemort regain his footing across the hall, watched him assess the situation in the rapid, intelligent way he always did, watched him understand that every offensive option available to his forces was being neutralized by the architecture of the building itself. 12 seconds, roughly. That was how long the eruption lasted before it ran out of impetus. The silence that followed was a different texture than the first one. You've turned the school into a weapon, Voldemort said. There was something new in his voice, not fear, not yet, but its precursor. A tightening. The quality of someone recalculating on the fly. I've turned it back into what it always was, Harry said. A place of safety. It just hasn't had anyone to remind it of that for a while. Behind the wall of Death Eaters, something moved. A masked figure pushed forward through the group, not aggressively, urgently, with a particular quality of desperate motion that Harry recognized before the figure pulled off its mask. Draco Malfoy. His face was white and his eyes were bright and he was breathing hard, not from exertion but from some internal pressure that had apparently been building for considerably longer than today. "Draco," Voldemort said. His voice was flat and cold and carried an extremely specific threat. Draco didn't look at him. He looked at Harry with the expression of someone who has made a decision they know is going to be expensive and has decided to pay the price before they lose their nerve. "Potter," he said. "The compact. It applies to anyone who qualifies under the Founder's definition. Active practitioner of systematic domination through terror." He said it quickly, clearly having rehearsed it. "I've been operating under his orders for 2 years. Performing acts that qualify. I know I qualify." His jaw was tight. "I want to acknowledge it voluntarily. Before the magic requires it." The entrance hall went completely silent. Even the Death Eaters behind Draco had stopped moving. Voldemort turned to look at Draco with an expression that was beyond anger, that specific, cold quality that preceded decisions rather than reactions. "You are making," he said, "a very serious, I'm making the only choice that makes sense," Draco said, still not looking at him. "I've been making choices that don't make sense for 2 years because I was afraid of you. I'm in a building where the wards are controlled by someone who has just demonstrated that being afraid of you is structurally pointless. So." He looked at Harry. "How does it work?" Harry studied him for a moment. Draco's hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear of Harry, from the specific tremor of someone who has stepped off a high place and is still in the air, waiting to see if they land badly. "Step forward," Harry said. "Away from them." Draco stepped forward, and the distance that opened between him and the Death Eaters behind him was small in physical terms and vast in every other way. Harry held up his right hand. The ring. The stone moved in its setting, steady and present. "You know what you've done," Harry said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Draco said. "And you acknowledge the debt to the magic you've misused." Draco's face worked for a moment, the specific struggle of someone whose entire upbringing had been organized around never admitting error, never bowing, never conceding anything to anyone outside the tight hierarchy of family name and house pride. He swallowed it. "Yes," he said. The ring blazed. The warmth of it moved outward, the castle's attending presence acknowledging what had just happened, and Draco flinched slightly, not from pain but from the sensation of being recognized by something much larger than himself, which was, Harry understood, the most startling thing that had ever happened to Draco Malfoy. It lasted 3 seconds. Then it was done. Draco stood in the middle of the entrance hall, slightly trembling, with an expression that was somewhere between devastated and the lightest he'd ever looked. "Stand with Hermione and Ron," Harry said. Draco walked to them without looking back at the Death Eaters. Voldemort watched him go. His expression was extraordinary, the mask of control almost fully restored, but beneath it, something working. Something struggling. Harry could feel it in the ring, a pressure building in the compact's framework, the same pressure that had been building since Voldemort walked through the doors, the magical debt asserting itself with increasing force, the way water asserts itself against a dam. "You're going to kneel, Tom," Harry said, and his voice was not triumphant, not cruel, just clear. "We both know it. The magic knows it. I think, on some level, you knew it when you came here, which means that somewhere underneath all of this," he gestured at Voldemort's entire construction, the robes, the persona, the carefully maintained architecture of terror, "you came here because you wanted to know what it felt like. What it felt like to be required to acknowledge something." "Don't," Voldemort said. His voice was very quiet and very cold. "You've been running from that your whole life," Harry said. "From the idea that there's something you can't conquer. Something that doesn't care how powerful you are or how many people fear you or how many pieces of your soul you've hidden in the dark. You made yourself immortal so you'd never have to stop and face the fact that you weren't the most important thing in the world. And here you are. I will not be lectured, Voldemort said, by a child. I'm not lecturing, Harry said. I'm just telling you what I see. And what I see is a man who has spent 50 years being terrified of exactly this moment. The compact moved. It wasn't a visible thing, there was no light, no sound, no theatrical display. It was a shift in the room's magical atmosphere, a change of pressure that everyone present felt in some register, whether they understood it or not. The Death Eaters along the walls shifted uneasily. McGonagall, on the staircase, gripped the banister. Voldemort's body moved against his will. It was small at first, a slight bending of the knee, involuntary, immediately resisted with a visible effort that showed in every line of him, the rigid containment of a man whose entire identity was built on never yielding. He fought it. Harry had expected him to fight it. He fought it with genuine, impressive power. The magical force he brought to bear against the compact's requirement was extraordinary, and for 20 full seconds the entrance hall held that specific tension of an irresistible force meeting something that believed itself immovable. Then his knee touched the floor. It was not graceful. It was not the smooth formal bow that Griplock had given, or the quiet acknowledgement that Draco had managed. It was hard and halting and clearly involuntary, and it lasted perhaps 4 seconds, and in those 4 seconds every Death Eater in the room saw something they had, regardless of anything else they might have witnessed in their years of service, never seen before. Lord Voldemort, on his knee. The compact accepted the acknowledgement. The pressure released. Voldemort rose, quickly, the motion containing something that in anyone else Harry would have read as anguish, and straightened to his full height and looked at Harry with red eyes that were blazing with something beyond fury. Harry met them. Now, Harry said. The Horcruxes. The room inhaled. What? Voldemort said. The soul magic, Harry said. The fragments. I know about all of them, more than you know I know, because the castle's memory includes every moment you spent within these walls and what you were doing in them. The diary. The ring, not this ring, the gaunt ring, which is already destroyed. The locket, the cup, the diadem. He paused. Nagini. And the one you made by accident in 1981. He held Voldemort's gaze. Me. The silence was complete. Hermione's breath, behind him. Ron's very slight shift of weight. The creak of McGonagall's hand on the banister. You know, Voldemort said, and his voice had stripped itself of everything except the bare metal of it, all the smoothness gone. I've known for a while, Harry said. And the castle can expose them all simultaneously. All of them, wherever they are, whatever the distance. The Heart Room's power is specifically designed for exactly this kind of soul magic, because the founders understood that the worst corruption of magic isn't domination or terror. It's this. Treating your own soul as currency. He let that land. When I use it, every Horcrux you have will be visible. Locatable. Destroyable. And you will be mortal. A long moment. Voldemort said nothing. I'm going to do it today, Harry said. Before you leave. I wanted you to know in advance, because, and this is something Slytherin wrote into the compact's framework, which I think you'd appreciate if you'd ever read him properly, the acknowledgement is given more honestly when you understand what follows it. I'm not telling you to terrify you. I'm telling you because you deserve to know what's happening to you. Something extraordinary moved across Voldemort's face. Harry watched it happen, watched the calculation and the fury and the disbelief all move through, and then, briefly, very briefly, something else. Something older and quieter and more human. Something that might have lived in Tom Riddle at 11, before the choices compacted into the person standing in the entrance hall of Hogwarts in black robes with red eyes and no nose, and nothing left of the boy who had walked in through these same doors 80 years ago except the hunger. You could have simply killed me, Voldemort said. When the Horcruxes are gone, you will be able to. I know, Harry said. So why? Because killing you isn't the point, Harry said. The compact isn't about killing. It's about accountability. And because, he paused, and said the thing he'd understood in the heart room, sitting in the chair in the room of walls covered in 1,000 years of writing. Because Slytherin designed this for you specifically. For every Tom Riddle who ever lived. He understood that people who became what you became didn't do it because they were born monstrous. They did it because they were brilliant and afraid, and nobody built anything big enough to hold them. So he built something. And here we are. Voldemort stared at him for a very long time. Then he said, very quietly, "You are nothing like I expected you to be." "I know," Harry said. "Tom." And in his voice was the thing that had been different since Gringotts, that quality that was his, and also something older, not cruelty, not superiority. Something closer to honesty, and something closer to pity, and something that was neither of those but contained both. "Sit down." It was an extraordinary thing to say. Not a command, not an order, not a decree from the heir of Hogwarts to a vassal. An invitation. The tone of someone who has something to say and believes the other person should hear it seated rather than standing. Voldemort sat down on the bottom step of the marble staircase. Like a man. Like a person who is tired. The Death Eaters were utterly motionless. Harry sat on the step below him, which meant he was looking up at Voldemort, which was deliberate. "The Horcruxes," Harry said, more quietly now. "Where are the ones that are left?" "The locket is at the Ministry," Voldemort said, and the absence of evasion in his voice was the strangest sound Harry had ever heard from him. The acknowledgement had done something, the knowledge that Slytherin had predicted, the thing Harry had told him wouldn't be reversible. It hadn't broken him or humbled him into submission. But it had stripped something away. The performance of it. The specific grandiosity that required every statement to be a declaration rather than a communication. In the Department of Mysteries. In a locked case. The cup is in a vault at Gringotts, a different vault, belonging to Bellatrix Lestrange. The diadem is in this building. In the room of requirement. "And Nagini," Harry said. "With me," Voldemort said. "Always with me." A pause. "You understand what it means to me?" "Yes," Harry said. A long silence. The Death Eaters along the walls had not moved. They were watching their lord sit on a step in Hogwarts and answer Harry Potter's questions in a flat, even voice, and the world that had organized itself around their certainty in his invincibility was dismantling itself in real time, and there was absolutely nothing any of them could do about it. Harry stood. He looked at Voldemort. "There's a room downstairs," he said. "The Heart Room. I'm going to go there now and use the castle's accumulated power to expose every Horcrux simultaneously. Your Death Eaters can wait in the entrance hall, the wards will hold them. I want you in the Heart Room with me when it happens." Voldemort looked at him. The red eyes were still and flat as water. "Why?" "Because you should see it," Harry said. "You should see what it looks like. What they look like, exposed. You made them in the dark, in secret, and you've kept them in secret for 50 years. I think you should see them clearly, once, before they're gone." It was a remarkable thing to ask, and both of them knew it. It was not mercy. Harry was going to destroy the Horcruxes regardless, and they both knew that too. It was something else. Something that the Compact's framework had built in, that Slytherin had understood when he wrote "The heir is not a ruler, the heir is a reminder," the difference between taking something from a person and making them understand what they're losing. Voldemort stood from the step. "Griphook is in the castle," Harry said, turning to Hermione, who nodded immediately. She'd arranged it, as he'd asked her to, the Gringotts connection making the vault access straightforward. "The locket and the cup will be retrieved and brought here. The diadem is already here." He looked at Ron. "The room of requirement. You know where it is. On it, Ron said. Draco, Harry said. Draco, who was standing at the edge of the group with the expression of someone who has crossed a threshold and is still orienting to the new room, looked up. What do you need? Nagini, Harry said. She'll need to be separated from him for this. I need someone who can manage a large snake without panicking. Given your history with dark arts objects, I think you're better equipped than most people in this building to handle the psychological weight of it. Draco blinked. Clearly he had not expected to be given a task of trust 30 minutes after joining the other side. I can do that, he said, and meant it. Don't hurt her unless you have to, Harry said. She's as much a victim of him as anyone. Then Harry turned to Voldemort, who had been watching all of this with an expression that was, and Harry thought this was perhaps the most significant thing that had happened in the whole of the encounter, completely unreadable. Not because he was concealing it, but because it was genuinely complex in a way that Tom Riddle's face had probably not been for a very long time. Come on, then, Harry said. I'll show you the room. McGonagall stopped Harry on the staircase, one hand briefly on his arm. Voldemort was ahead of them, moving through the castle with Harry's permission, and the castle permitting him to move, which was its own kind of statement. McGonagall's face was extraordinary. Harry had never seen her look like this, not alarmed, not awestruck, but something more specific. The face of a woman who has spent her life defending a place and has just watched that place defend itself. Harry, she said. The Grindelwald summons. The portrait. After the Horcruxes, Harry said. Bring Dumbledore's portrait to the entrance hall. I'll do the remote acknowledgement when I come back up. She nodded. Then, quietly, are you all right? He thought about it honestly. Yes, he said. Actually yes. She let go of his arm. Then go. The staircase to the Heart Room was different with Voldemort on it. Harry felt the castle's attending presence shift as they descended, not becoming hostile, but more focused, more charged, in the way a room changes when the specific person it has been thinking about walks into it. The walls lit as they went lower, the amber light warm and dense, and Harry heard Voldemort's breathing change slightly as the depth and age of the magic around them became palpable. You've been here before, Harry said. Not accusingly. The castle had shown him. Once, Voldemort said. In my 6th year. I found the staircase and descended to what I believed was the lowest level, below the dungeons. But the Heart Room wasn't accessible to me then. What did you find? Nothing, Voldemort said. A blank wall. A dead end. He was quiet for a moment. I spent 3 months trying to get past it. Harry said nothing. I thought, Voldemort said, that there was something powerful being kept from me. Something the headmaster was hiding. I tried every approach I knew. He paused. It never occurred to me that the barrier wasn't a lock. That it simply wasn't ready. That you weren't the right person, Harry said. Yes, Voldemort said. That it was waiting for someone else. They reached the Heart Room. The walls lit at Harry's presence, the full blazing illumination of the Founder's tongue and all the centuries of accumulated text, the mosaic floor, the stone chair at the center. Harry felt the castle's gathered power in his feet and his chest and the ring on his hand, the deep warmth of something enormous and old and patient. Voldemort stood at the edge of the mosaic and looked at the room. At the walls. At the writing. And Harry watched his face and saw something he had not expected to see there. He saw grief. Not for himself. Not the self-pity of a man contemplating his losses. Something more abstract, the grief of a person who has just seen, for the first time, in physical and undeniable form, the scale of what they missed. What they could have been. What they chose not to be. All 4 of them, Voldemort said. The writing on the walls. Together. After everything they disagreed about. They disagreed about a lot, Harry said. But they agreed on this. That magic deserved protection. That people who used magic deserved protection. From each other, and from themselves. Harry moved to the chair. Stand back from the mosaic. He sat down. The heart room's power gathered. He'd felt it the first time he sat here, the enormous accumulated depth of 1,000 years, the stored warmth of every lesson learned and every act of courage and every moment of genuine human growth that these walls had witnessed, all of it patient and vast and available. He pressed his palm flat against the armrest of the chair. The ring blazed, deep red, steady, the stone moving in its setting with the slow breathing pattern he'd come to know as the castle's acknowledgement of his presence and intent. And then he reached down. Into the foundations. Into the deepest stored power of Hogwarts. And he pulled. The light that filled the heart room was not dramatic in the way of spells and curses. It was slow and total, the way sunlight fills a room when cloud cover breaks, not arriving from a direction but simply present, everywhere at once. Deep amber warming to gold warming to something that had no color Harry knew, something beyond the visible spectrum that he experienced as warmth and depth and weight. Voldemort made a sound. It was small and involuntary and it was the most human sound Harry had ever heard from him. Because the Horcruxes were visible. Not physically present, they didn't materialize in the room. But in the light of the heart room's power, they were apparent. Like objects seen in X-ray, like ships seen from above through clear water. Harry could see all of them simultaneously, the locket, glowing cold and sick in a locked case under the Ministry, the cup, deep underground in Gringotts, the diadem in the Room of Requirement, hidden behind decades of junk, Nagini somewhere above them in the entrance hall, and the one inside himself, faint and small and already damaged from his first death, barely clinging. He could see them all. And Voldemort could see them too, see them in the way the compact's accumulated magic made visible to everyone in the heart room, and Harry watched his face as he looked at the projected reality of his own soul, fragmented and scattered across the country, distributed into objects and a snake and a child, and saw the full reality of what he had made himself into. Not powerful. Scattered. Not immortal. Fractured. Harry did not enjoy watching it. He simply let it happen, because it needed to happen, and he held the castle's power steady and let the exposure continue until he was certain every Horcrux had been fully mapped and located. Then he let the power recede, slowly, the way a tide recedes, not snatched away but gradually withdrawing, leaving clarity behind. The light faded. The heart room returned to its amber glow. Voldemort was standing with both hands at his sides and his eyes closed and his face entirely exposed in a way that Harry doubted anyone alive had seen before. "I can feel them," he said. "I've always been able to feel them. But like this," he stopped. "Like this they feel like wounds." "They are wounds," Harry said quietly. "Every one of them." A long silence. "The piece inside you," Voldemort said. "The accidental one." "I know about it," Harry said. "I've known for a while." "It will have to, I know," Harry said. Voldemort opened his eyes. They were, Harry realized with a start, slightly less red than they had been when he walked in. The magical distortion of them, the artificial quality, the remade eyes of a remade body, had shifted minutely but perceptibly. As though the exposure of the heart room's light had touched even the physical alterations he'd made to himself. "Will it hurt?" Voldemort said. And there was something in the question, the directness of it, the complete absence of performance, that was so utterly unlike everything Harry had ever heard from him that for a moment he wasn't sure it had been spoken aloud. He looked at Voldemort. "Destroying the one inside me?" He considered the honest answer. "Probably. I don't intend to die to do it, the heart room's power should be able to excise it without killing the host. But I don't know for certain. I've never done it before." "No," Voldemort said. "I meant," he paused. He seemed to be navigating language that he had not used in a very long time, possibly since childhood. "The others." When you destroy them, will it hurt? Harry understood what he was actually asking. Not about pain in the physical sense. About what it felt like to have pieces of yourself dissolved. I think so, Harry said. I think it should hurt. I think anything that doesn't hurt when you lose it wasn't worth much in the first place. Voldemort looked at him for a long moment. Do it, he said. Harry pressed his palm to the armrest again. The ring warmed. The castle gathered. And in the soft gold light of the room where Hogwarts kept its oldest power, Harry Potter began the work of making Tom Riddle mortal. Chapter 5, What Falls and What Remains. The destruction of the Horcruxes took 4 hours. Not because it was difficult, exactly. The Heart Room's power made the exposure and dissolution possible in a way that no previous method had managed with such precision. What made it take 4 hours was the care. Harry moved through each one methodically, the castle's warmth guiding the process the way a skilled hand guides a scalpel, not shattering but unwinding, separating the fragment of soul from its vessel cleanly rather than violently. The locket went first. Griphook had retrieved it. Harry had felt the Gringotts goblin's presence in the castle above them with a sort of peripheral awareness, the way you're aware of people moving in other rooms of a house you know well. The locket arrived in the Heart Room in Griphook's hands, carried at arm's length with professional goblin caution, and when Harry reached for it the whisper voice it had always carried in his memory went silent in the first second of contact with the ring. He dissolved it sitting in the chair. The fragment of Voldemort's soul didn't scream the way the diary had screamed when the basilisk Fong went in. It simply came apart, the way fog comes apart in sunlight, gradually, with diminishing resistance, until there was nothing left but a tarnished silver locket on the mosaic floor and a very slight change in the room's atmosphere, like the air after a window is opened. Voldemort made no sound when it happened. He was standing at the edge of the mosaic, arms folded, watching. Harry could feel, through the ring, the compact's connection between them, not telepathic, nothing so specific, but a structural awareness of the magical change in Voldemort each time a Horcrux dissolved. Like watching a knot loosen. One strand at a time. The cup came second, retrieved from Bellatrix's vault by a Gringotts team Griphook had apparently had on standby, which suggested that the goblins had known considerably more about what today was going to involve than they disclosed in advance. Harry would have been irritated by this if it hadn't also been enormously practical. The diadem Ron brought down himself, wrapped in his jacket, holding it the way you hold something that has been sitting in a nest of dark magic for 30 years, which is to say very carefully and at a slight distance from his body. He handed it to Harry without ceremony and watched the dissolution with the focused, steady attention he gave to things that mattered. Doing all right? Harry asked him, when the diadem was gone. Mate, I'm watching you dismantle a Dark Lord's soul using a 1,000-year-old chair, Ron said. I'm doing brilliantly. This is the most interesting Tuesday of my life. It's Thursday, Hermione said from the doorway. She'd come down with Ron. Still, Ron said. Nagini was the hardest. Not magically, in terms of the Heart Room's process, Nagini was not significantly different from the others. But Nagini was alive, which the others hadn't been, and alive meant pain in a way that objects didn't experience it, and Harry felt the snake's distress through the compact's connection to the magic of the thing inside her, and he took his time with it. He asked Draco to bring her in and keep her calm, which Draco did with a grimness that suggested this was not a comfortable task but also one he was absolutely going to complete. Harry talked to Nagini. In Parseltongue. He hadn't planned to, it simply happened, because the snake was frightened and the language was available and it seemed rude not to use it. He told her what he was doing and that she wasn't being harmed, just freed from something that had been inside her without her consent for 20 years, which was approximately true. He felt Hermione and Ron trying not to react to the sounds coming from him, and he felt Voldemort's very still attention from across the room. The fragment left Nagini gently. The snake went immediately calm, that specific deep calm of an animal that has been under low-grade physical duress for a very long time and has suddenly had it removed. She coiled loosely on the mosaic floor and didn't move. For down. 2 remaining. Harry looked at Voldemort. Voldemort was 4/5 mortal and knew it. Harry could see the change in him, not dramatic, not the physical transformation he might have imagined, but a quality of presence that was different. Less frictionless. Something that had been artificially smoothed in him, the way a sanded plank is smooth rather than naturally so, had roughened back toward the human texture underneath. "The piece inside me," Harry said. "I need to do this one differently." "How?" Hermione said, moving closer. "The heart room's power can't excise it externally," Harry said. "Not from where you're standing, I mean I need to direct it inward. Into myself. Which means it's going to feel significant." "Significant," Ron said. "Define significant." "Like dying," Harry said. Briefly. "Not actually. But like." A pause. "Harry," Hermione said, in the specific tone she reserved for situations she objected to and had already calculated she wasn't going to be able to stop. "I've done it before," Harry said. "Sort of. The night Voldemort killed me in the forest, I went somewhere and came back. This is the same mechanism, just controlled rather than accidental." He looked at the ring. "The castle can hold me here. The ring is the anchor. I go inward, find the fragment, and the heart room's power dissolves it the same way it dissolved the others, just from inside rather than outside." "And if something goes wrong," Ron said. "It won't," Harry said. "But if, Ron." Harry looked at him steadily. "I need you to not ask me that right now." Ron closed his mouth. He nodded once. He moved to stand beside Hermione and he reached over and gripped her hand, which told Harry that Ron was significantly more worried than he was showing and had decided physical proximity to Hermione was the appropriate response to that, which Harry thought was one of the most Ron things he'd ever done. Harry looked at Voldemort. "You should probably look away for this." "I won't," Voldemort said. "Fair enough." Harry sat in the chair, pressed both palms to the armrests, and went inward. The internal landscape of the Horcrux was not the King's Cross station he'd visited the first time. It wasn't any place, exactly, it was a quality of awareness, a section of his own consciousness that had always felt slightly wrong, slightly overcrowded, the way a room feels when there's furniture in it that you don't recognize and can't remember acquiring. The fragment of Voldemort's soul was there, small and damaged and barely coherent, the accidental byproduct of a murder committed on a child in 1981, and it had been sitting in him for 16 years. He'd carried it to school. He'd carried it through 7 years of everything Hogwarts had been for him, every meal in the Great Hall, every Quidditch match, every exam he'd barely passed and every teacher who'd given up on him and every friend he'd made. He'd carried it into the Department of Mysteries and through the Triwizard Tournament and in the graveyard when Voldemort had taken his blood. He'd carried it in the forest when he walked out to die. He looked at it. Small. Frightened, in the way that all the Horcruxes had been frightened when exposed, not with the self-awareness of a person but with the animal recognition of a thing that knows it is being dissolved. He felt, unexpectedly, a complicated sympathy for it that had nothing to do with Voldemort. It hadn't asked to be here. It had been put here by an act of violence and it had been trapped for 16 years in a consciousness that was fundamentally alien to it and hostile to its nature. He let the heart room's power in. The dissolution was fast. Like exhaling something you've been holding in your chest for a very long time, sudden, enormous relief, a lightness that was physical and also something more than physical, the sense of a weight you'd stopped noticing because you'd been carrying it so long, suddenly absent. He came back to the heart room with a gasp that echoed off the ancient stone. Ron said something extremely loud and completely unprintable. Hermione made a sound that was presumably relief but occupied similar frequency to alarm. Harry gripped the armrests. He felt entirely himself, more himself than he had ever felt, which he hadn't known was possible. Like a room that's been cleared of furniture you didn't choose, the walls suddenly visible and the floor open and the light reaching every corner. "Done," he said. He looked at Voldemort. Voldemort was standing very still with his arms at his sides. His eyes were closed. He had felt every dissolution in sequence, and this last one, the accidental Horcrux, the piece of himself buried in an infant in a moment of unrepeatable magical trauma, this one had moved across his face in a way that the others hadn't. Something had released in him too. When he opened his eyes, they were darker. Not dramatically, not a sudden transformation, not the reversal of all the physical alterations he'd made to himself. But measurably, visibly darker. The supernatural red receding towards something that had once, decades ago, been brown. He was mortal. The silence in the heart room was total. The walls glowed softly. Nagini lay coiled on the mosaic. The empty vessels of 4 destroyed Horcruxes were arranged neatly near the door, which Hermione had done while Harry was working, because Hermione's response to extraordinary events was to organize the physical space. "It's done," Harry said. He wasn't talking to Voldemort specifically. He was talking to the castle, which heard him, and the warm answering pulse of the ring confirmed it. Voldemort opened his eyes fully and looked at Harry across the room, and Harry looked back, and for the first time in their entire shared history the dynamic between them was not predator and prey or hunter and hunted or monster and chosen one. It was 2 people standing in a room after something enormous had happened and neither of them entirely certain what the next sentence was. "What happens now?" Voldemort said. "To me." "That depends," Harry said, "on what you do." Upstairs, the entrance hall was a specific kind of chaos when they came back up, organized, restrained, the particular tension of 30 Death Eaters standing in a warded castle whose magic was actively uncooperative with everything they were inclined to do, while McGonagall and Flitwick stood at the foot of the staircase with the expressions of people who have been running a very delicate containment operation for 4 hours and would like to be relieved. The Death Eaters saw Voldemort come up the stairs behind Harry, and the silence that moved through them was like a dropped stone in water. They would have felt the Horcruxes dissolving. Anyone with sufficient sensitivity to dark magic and a connection to Voldemort would have felt it, a sequence of small extinguishments, and they would have known what it meant. Their lord was mortal. Harry watched them process this. Some of them poorly. The ones closest to the doors were doing the mathematics of escape versus consequences. Some better, a handful stood very still with the expressions of people who have just had a significant belief structure removed from under their feet and are figuring out if they can stand without it. Lucius Malfoy was among the latter. He was in the center of the group without his mask. He'd removed it at some point in the past 4 hours, which Harry found interesting, and he was looking at Voldemort with an expression that was equal parts shock and something that might, under different circumstances, have been liberation. His eyes moved to Draco, standing across the hall with Harry's group. Something passed between them, father and son, both of them stripped of the scaffolding of Malfoy pride and Death Eater loyalty and Slytherin hierarchy, that Harry deliberately didn't watch closely, because it wasn't his. "The compact," Harry said, turning to the room. His voice carried, not because he projected it deliberately but because the castle made room for it, the acoustics of the hall attending to him in the way they always attended to the air. "Every person in this hall who has operated under the systematic domination provisions, anyone who qualifies under the Founder's definition, the compact applies to you. Not as punishment. As accounting." He looked at the masked and unmasked faces along the walls. "I'm not going to summon each of you individually. I'm going to give you a choice. Voluntary acknowledgement, here, now, is available to everyone who wants it. What voluntary acknowledgement means is that you account for what you've done in front of this castle's magic, you acknowledge the debt, and we determine together what comes next. What it doesn't mean is immunity, it doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean that the people you've harmed stop having legitimate grievances against you." A long silence. "The alternative," Harry continued, "is that you leave this castle and return to the world, and the compact's requirement follows you. It won't go away. You've drawn from Britain's magical foundations. That debt doesn't expire." He paused. "I'd rather you account for it now. In a room where the magic is honest and there's no performance required. But the choice is yours. 7 Death Eaters stepped forward immediately. Then another 4, more slowly. Then Lucius Malfoy, alone and deliberate, walked across the hall and stood in the group that had stepped forward, and looked at the floor with an expression that cost him something, and Harry respected the cost of it enough not to comment. The voluntary acknowledgements took an hour. Harry moved through them the way he'd moved through the Horcruxes, carefully, with attention to each individual, the ring-worm and the castle attending. Each one was different. Some were quick and businesslike, the acknowledgement given with the brisk efficiency of people who wanted it over with. Some were slower and more complicated, the debt being genuinely heavy and the person giving it clearly not practiced in accounting for themselves. Draco's was the only one that had already been given, and Harry noticed that he stood through the others with a steadiness that was new, as though having done it himself had removed some weight he'd been redistributing awkwardly across his entire body. Through it all, Voldemort stood apart. He didn't participate in the proceedings. He watched. He watched with the specific attention of someone who is seeing something they have spent a lifetime preventing themselves from understanding, the thing they ran from, made visible in everyone around them. People accounting for themselves. The specific vulnerability of standing in front of something honest and saying, yes, I did this, and I understand what it cost. When it was done, Harry turned to him. The Grindelwald acknowledgement, he said. I want to do that now, while the castle's attention is fully gathered. Voldemort looked at him. Why tell me? Because Grindelwald is the person you modeled yourself on, Harry said. Before you overtook him. Before you decided he wasn't extreme enough. You spent years studying him, learning from him. I thought you might want to see his acknowledgement. A long pause. Yes, Voldemort said quietly. Dumbledore's portrait had been carried down from the headmistress's office by McGonagall herself, a significant physical undertaking that she had apparently managed entirely alone, which Harry chose not to comment on. The portrait stood now on an easel near the foot of the staircase, and Dumbledore's painted face was composed in the way that only real effort makes something composed. Harry stood before it. Albus, he said. I'm ready, Dumbledore's portrait said. The compact's remote acknowledgement was unlike the direct one. No physical kneel was possible, which the founders had accounted for by encoding a magical equivalent, a direct transmission of the acknowledgement through the living magical network, requiring a proxy who had genuine connection to the subject. Dumbledore's connection to Grindelwald was the oldest, deepest, most layered thing Harry had ever felt through the ring, decades of love and grief and guilt and the particular ache of genuine intellectual kinship that had curdled into opposition. Harry pressed the ring to the frame of the portrait. The heart room's residual warmth, still in the ring from 4 hours of sustained use, moved along the connection. Harry felt it travel, through the portrait, through Dumbledore's magical imprint, through the network of magical Britain that the castle sat at the center of, outward across the sea to a high tower in the mountains of Austria where an old man had been imprisoned for decades, carrying as much guilt as his jailer and perhaps more intelligence about its source. The acknowledgement, when it came, was different from any other. It came back through the same channel, through the ring, through the portrait, and it arrived not with Grindelwald's voice but with something that was its essence, old, brilliant, genuinely remorseful in a way that had been sitting in the dark for 40 years with nothing to do but compound itself, and the specific grief of someone who had understood their error entirely and spent the intervening decades being unable to do anything about it. Dumbledore's portrait exhaled. It wasn't a dramatic response. But it was real. The painted shoulders dropped by perhaps a centimeter and the tension around the painted eyes released and Dumbledore sat back in his painted chair and looked at the ceiling of his portrait for a moment before looking at Harry. "Thank you," he said, very quietly. "Don't thank me," Harry said. "It was yours to do." Nevertheless. Harry removed the ring from the portrait's frame. The connection closed. The room was quiet. He turned to face the entrance hall and the people in it, Death Eaters who had acknowledged and some who hadn't, and Draco Malfoy and Ron and Hermione and McGonagall and Flitwick and Slughorn who had materialized at some point and was pressing a handkerchief to his face in a way that suggested genuine emotion, which Harry found touching. And Voldemort, apart from everyone, standing near the high windows where the afternoon light was coming through in long golden columns. "Right," Harry said. "Now we talk about what happens next." What happened next involved 2 hours of the most unusual conversation Harry had ever been part of. The Death Eaters who had given voluntary acknowledgements were separated from those who hadn't. The ones who hadn't were escorted, by the castle's wards, which moved people with gentle and completely irresistible pressure, a feature Harry had discovered in the Heart Room with considerable appreciation for the Founder's practicality, to a set of secured rooms in the East Wing, where they would remain until Ministry officials could be notified. This happened with so little fuss that Harry suspected the wards had been waiting for exactly this instruction. The ones who had acknowledged were a different problem. The compact's provisions were clear that acknowledgement was not immunity, and Harry was clear about this too. He said it directly, without softening, to each of them. The acknowledgement meant they'd faced the magical debt. It didn't mean the Ministry had no claim on them, and it didn't mean the people they'd hurt were required to forgive them. What it meant was that Harry would speak to the compact's role in their situation to any legal proceeding that followed. Lucius Malfoy sat across from Harry at the long table in a room off the entrance hall, one of the teacher conference rooms, maps still pinned to the walls from the last academic year, summer dust on the window ledge, and Harry looked at him for a moment before speaking. "Your son made a choice today," Harry said. "I'm aware," Lucius said. His voice was what it had always been, careful, cultured, precise, but the scaffolding under it was different. The confidence that had always come from family name and political connection and the knowledge that someone more powerful was behind him had been removed, and what was left was just a man in his 50s who was genuinely uncertain what he was without it. "He made it before you did," Harry said. "Yes," Lucius said. "He did." "What are you going to do now?" Harry said. Not as an interrogation, as an actual question. Lucius looked at the maps on the walls. He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," he said, which Harry suspected was the most honest thing Lucius Malfoy had said in public in 30 years. "That's a reasonable place to start," Harry said, and meant it. The conversation with Voldemort was different entirely, and Harry had it alone. Not in the conference room, outside, on the castle steps, in the late afternoon light that had gone golden and long. Voldemort sat on the top step with his elbows on his knees and his hands loosely linked between them, and Harry sat beside him, and they talked the way people talk when they've been in an extraordinary situation together and the adrenaline has resolved and what remains is just conversation. "The Ministry," Voldemort said. "They'll want to imprison me." "They'll want to try," Harry said. "You've committed crimes that warrant it." "And you?" Voldemort looked at him. "What do you want?" Harry thought about it honestly, which was the only way he knew how to do things now. "I want you to be accountable," he said. "To people. To the wizarding world. To the families of everyone who died because of the choices you made." The compact's acknowledgement was the magical debt. "The human debt is different and it's not mine to collect. You could have simply left me mortal and let the world handle me," Voldemort said. "That would have been the efficient choice." "Probably," Harry said. "Why didn't you?" Harry looked at the lake. The sun was doing something beautiful to it, turning it copper at the center and deep blue at the edges, the mountains catching orange on their highest ridges. A late summer evening. He thought about the castle's memory of Tom Riddle arriving here at 11 years old, and the boy's face in that memory, before the choices, before the Horcruxes, before the construction of Voldemort out of the raw material of Tom Riddle's terror of mortality and insignificance. "Because Slytherin was right," Harry said. "You're not the first Tom Riddle. You won't be the last. And the answer to Tom Riddle is not to kill every iteration of him. The answer is to build something big enough that when the next one comes along, there's a room they can stand in and understand that their approach to the world is not the only one available." He paused. "You had nobody to show you that. Not Dumbledore, not the Ministry, not the orphanage and not Hogwarts, even. Everyone who should have showed you something different was too afraid of what you were or too dazzled by it. The compact should have been invoked 60 years ago. You should have been in that heart room at 16, not at 60-something. Voldemort was very still. You think, he said slowly, that this could have been prevented. I know it could have, Harry said. And I know it doesn't matter now, for your specific case. You've made the choices you made and the consequences are real and they belong to you. But it matters for the next one. He turned to look at Voldemort. That's what Hogwarts is for. Not just teaching magic, teaching people what magic is for. And under the Founders' Compact, the Heir of Hogwarts has the authority to restructure how that's done. The curriculum, the culture, the way the school identifies students who are heading toward dark paths and provides something better. You're going to reform the school, Voldemort said. I'm going to do what the Founders built it to do, Harry said. What it was always supposed to do before everyone forgot. Voldemort looked at the lake. For a long moment he was quiet with it. Then, without looking at Harry, the room. The heart room. If I had found it at 16, you would have felt the same thing you felt today, Harry said. The scale of it. The fact that the world is larger than your ambition and the magic is older than your fear. The same thing every Tom Riddle needs to feel. You think it would have stopped me? I think it would have changed something, Harry said. Maybe everything. Maybe nothing. You're the only one who knows what was in you at 16. A long silence. Something, Voldemort said, very quietly. It would have changed something. Harry didn't respond to that. He let it exist without comment, which was its own kind of respect. After a while, Voldemort stood. Harry stood beside him. They were roughly the same height, which Harry had never specifically noticed before. I'll go to the Ministry, Voldemort said. Voluntarily. I won't make them chase me. He said it with the tone of someone making a decision rather than surrendering to one. I have conditions. I want Gringotts to witness the legal proceedings. I don't trust the Ministry's accounting of things to be accurate. Griplock will send someone, Harry said. I'll request it personally. And I want it on record, Voldemort said, what the compact's acknowledgement involved. Not for mercy. For accuracy. I want the record of what actually happened to be the accurate one. I'll make sure of it, Harry said. They stood on the castle steps for a moment longer, in the late afternoon light, which had no interest in the significance of the occasion and continued being beautiful regardless. Then Voldemort said, without looking at him, you would have been extraordinary, in my house. Harry almost laughed. The Sorting Hat wanted to put me in Slytherin. I know, Voldemort said, and there was something in his voice that was the closest thing to humor Harry had ever heard from him. I read the Hat's confidential records in my 6th year. Of course you did, Harry said. Voldemort moved down the steps toward the grounds, and Harry watched him go, walking across the grass toward the gates, alone, in the evening light, moving with purpose in the direction of voluntary accountability, and Harry thought about what the castle's memory had shown him of Tom Riddle at 11 and thought, that's what it should have always looked like. Someone walking toward something rather than away. He stayed on the steps for another minute. Then Ron appeared at his shoulder with a plate of sandwiches, because the kitchen had apparently been operational for some time. Did you just have a conversation with Voldemort on the front steps? Ron said, offering him a sandwich. Yeah, Harry said, taking it. What about schools? Harry said. Mostly. Ron considered this. Right, he said. Okay. Hermione's inside having what I think is a breakdown, except she's doing it by writing 20 feet of notes. Draco Malfoy is in the kitchen eating biscuits like he hasn't eaten properly in 2 years, which I think might be literally true, and McGonagall is sitting in her office with a glass of something that is definitely not tea. She's earned it, Harry said. We all have, Ron said, and sat down on the steps beside him, and they ate their sandwiches in companionable silence while the sun finished its work on the lake and the mountains went purple in the dusk, and the castle stood behind them warm and old and attending, and for the first time in a very long time, the magic of Britain felt like exactly what the founders had always meant it to be. Something worth protecting. Chapter 6, The Heir Speaks. The Ministry of Magic sent 7 Aurors to Hogwarts the following morning. Harry knew they were coming before they arrived. The outer wards reported contact at 7:30, 7 distinct magical signatures moving through Hogsmeade with the specific coordinated pattern of people who have been told to move in formation and are following the instruction with the anxiety of people who aren't sure what they're walking into. He was eating breakfast in the Great Hall when the ring warmed, and he set down his fork and said, 7 Aurors, 10 minutes, and Ron immediately reached for 2 more pieces of toast on the grounds that confrontations with the Ministry were better handled on a full stomach. Hermione had been up since 5. She had a folder. The folder was, as far as Harry could tell, the most organized object he had ever seen in his life, cross-referenced, tabbed, with a color-coded index on the first page and footnotes that referenced both Gringotts documentation and Hogwarts archive materials and, in one remarkable section, a bibliography. She'd clearly anticipated this visit and prepared for it with the specific thoroughness of someone who has spent years watching institutions fail to handle things correctly and has decided that this time, the paperwork is going to be unimpeachable. You don't have to be their secretary, Ron told her, eyeing the folder. I'm not their secretary, Hermione said. I'm their historian. There's a considerable difference. The Ministry is going to try to take control of this, Harry said. Not worried, just naming the thing. They'll want to frame it as an Auror operation. They'll want to claim the credit for Voldemort's capture, rewrite the Compact's involvement, and find some legal mechanism that puts the heir of Hogwarts under Ministry authority rather than the other way around. They can try, Hermione said, with the serenity of someone holding an extremely good hand of cards. Harry looked at the ring. The stone moved in its setting, steady as a heartbeat. Let's go meet them at the gate, he said. The 7 Aurors were led by Kingsley Shacklebolt, which was either a coincidence or the Ministry's way of sending someone with enough personal history with Harry to smooth what they anticipated might be a difficult encounter. Kingsley was in full Auror robes, his gold earring catching the morning light, and he had the careful expression of a man who had been given a mission briefing that he privately considered incomplete. Behind him were 6 Aurors Harry didn't know by name, mid-career, competent-looking, carrying the particular watchfulness of people who have been told the situation is complex and have taken the advice seriously. They stopped at the gate when they found Harry already there, which was a small advantage of the castle's early warning that Harry hadn't specifically planned but appreciated. Harry, Kingsley said. Kingsley, Harry said. Good morning. The Ministry has been, Kingsley paused, choosing his words with the care of someone navigating a conversation that has several possible trajectories and wants to select a good one. There have been reports. Extraordinary events at Gringotts, magical disturbances across Britain, and then yesterday, he looked at the castle behind Harry. We received a voluntary contact from Tom Riddle, Harry said. Yes. He arrived here yesterday afternoon with approximately 30 Death Eaters, honored the Founders' Compact's acknowledgement requirement, surrendered the locations of all remaining Horcruxes, and agreed to submit to Ministry legal process voluntarily. Griphook of Gringotts is inside as witness to the Horcrux dissolution. The Death Eaters who did not voluntarily acknowledge are secured in the East Wing under Castle Wards. The ones who did acknowledge are in the West Wing under a different but equally effective containment. Kingsley looked at him for a long moment. The Founders' Compact, he said. It's real, it's active, and it's been in operation since yesterday afternoon, Harry said. Hermione has prepared documentation covering the legal and historical framework. I'd suggest your team read it before anyone makes any decisions about jurisdiction, authority, or the question of who is running this situation. One of the 6 Aurors behind Kingsley, a woman in her 30s with a skeptical expression that Harry respected, said, with respect, Mr. Potter, this is a Ministry operation and the capture of, it isn't, Harry said pleasantly. It's a compact proceeding. Those predate the Ministry by 8 centuries. The Ministry's authority in this instance is downstream of the Compact's authority, not upstream of it. That's not a political position, it's a structural legal fact, and Hermione's documentation establishes it thoroughly. He smiled at the Auror, who blinked. But I'm very glad you're here, and I think the Ministry's involvement in the accountability proceedings that follow is genuinely important. I'd like to work with you on that. What I won't do is let anyone reframe what happened here as something it wasn't. Kingsley was looking at Harry with an expression that was doing several things simultaneously: professional assessment, personal surprise, and something underneath both that was closer to satisfaction, the look of someone who had spent a long time hoping something would work out and is watching it work out. "Come inside," Harry said, and turned toward the castle. Kingsley fell into step beside him. Behind them, the 6 Aurors followed, and behind them, the morning light moved across the Hogwarts grounds in the particular way it had in late July, bright and long-shadowed and very clear, the kind of light that makes everything look exactly like what it is. "You've grown up," Kingsley said quietly, not accusingly. "I've caught up," Harry said. "There's a difference." The morning was a series of conversations that Harry moved through with the deliberate, careful attention he'd been bringing to everything since the Heart Room. He spoke to the Aurors with Hermione beside him and the documentation laid out on the long table in the conference room, and he watched the Ministry's team work through the cognitive adjustment of discovering that the thing they'd come to take control of had already been comprehensively handled and their role was the secondary one. The skeptical Auror, her name was Proudfoot, she volunteered it after reading the first 20 pages of Hermione's folder, came around fastest. Harry liked her. She read quickly, asked precise questions, and when she understood something she moved on without requiring it to be repeated. "The Horcrux destructions," she said. "These are verifiable? Not just your account?" "Griphook witnessed the process and will provide Gringotts' testimony," Harry said. "The physical vessels are still in the East Wing. You're welcome to examine them." He paused. "The one that was inside me can't be physically examined, obviously, but the castle's own magical record will show it. The Heart Room keeps documentation of everything that happens within it. I'll give your forensic team full access." Proudfoot made a note. "The voluntary acknowledgements," she said. "The Death Eaters. Those carry legal weight in the context of sentencing? The Compact's involvement? That's going to require some creative legal thinking," Hermione said, "because the Compact's framework isn't codified in current Ministry law. But it predates Ministry law, which means it supersedes it rather than conflicting with it. I've outlined 3 possible approaches to integration in Section 4. Proudfoot looked at Hermione with the expression that people frequently wore when they'd been dealing with Hermione for a sustained period and had moved through surprise into a kind of professional appreciation. "Did you sleep last night?" she asked. "Briefly," Hermione said. "There was a lot to write." Ron, from his position leaning against the wall with his arms folded, said nothing, but his expression was the one he wore when he was proud of someone and didn't think saying so would help the current situation. The harder conversation was with Cornelius Fudge's replacement, a minister named Millicent Bagnold who had been appointed the previous year and who arrived by flew around 11 with 2 senior officials and the particular energy of a bureaucrat who has been informed that the situation is not what the initial report suggested and is bracing for the full scope of the discrepancy. She was a compact woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and the practiced composure of someone who has managed politically volatile situations for decades. She assessed Harry with the quick, comprehensive attention of a professional, and Harry assessed her back, and they recognized each other, not personally, but categorically, as people who were going to have a substantive conversation rather than a performative one. "Minister," Harry said. "Mr. Potter," she said. "I'm going to ask you to explain, in your own words and without the folder," she glanced at Hermione, "what exactly has happened here and what the heir of Hogwarts intends to do next." Harry told her. Directly, clearly, without the diplomatic softening he'd noticed some of the others applying to the edges of the story. He told her about Gringotts and the Ring and the Compact and the Summons and the Heart Room and the Horcruxes and Voldemort's voluntary surrender and Grindelwald's acknowledgement and the 30 Death Eaters in the East and West Wings. He told her what the Compact was and what the heir's authority entailed and how both of those things related to Ministry legal framework. She listened without interrupting, which was rare and valuable. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "The heir of Hogwarts," she said. "In the Ministry's legal framework, that's a title without statutory definition. In the Compact's framework," Harry said, "it's a title without an upper limit. The Ministry's authority derives ultimately from the magical foundations of Britain. Those foundations, the source of all wizarding magic in these islands, are what Hogwarts sits at the center of, and the Compact is the governance structure of those foundations. Which means the heir's authority is constitutionally prior to the Ministry's, not subordinate to it." A pause. "You're not making a bid for political power," she said. It wasn't a question, she was working it out. "I'm not interested in running the Ministry," Harry said. "The Compact's heir isn't a political position. It's a structural one. What it means practically is that certain things, the welfare of Hogwarts, the fundamental integrity of magical Britain's foundations, the Compact's accountability mechanisms, those are mine to protect, and the Ministry can't override that. Everything else, governance, legislation, law enforcement, that's the Ministry's domain and I have no desire to interfere with it. But if you believed the Ministry was operating in a way that violated the Compact's principles," she said. "Then we'd have a conversation," Harry said. "A direct one. Like this one." Another pause. Then Bagnold said, almost to herself, "Dumbledore never managed to be this straightforward." "Dumbledore had different constraints," Harry said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she straightened slightly, a small adjustment, barely visible, but Harry recognized it as the specific gesture of someone who has made a decision and is now in the mode of implementing rather than deliberating. "What do you need from the Ministry," she said, "to move forward?" Harry reached across and took one specific page from Hermione's folder. "3 things," he said. "The Compact's framework needs formal recognition in Ministry legal records, not as law that the Ministry controls, but as constitutional precedent that sits above Ministry law. The Hogwarts curriculum review needs Ministry cooperation to implement without obstruction. And Voldemort's trial needs to be handled in full public record, everything visible, nothing sealed, no convenient omissions. The wizarding world deserves the complete account." Bagnold read the page. She looked up. "The curriculum review. Hogwarts has been teaching magic without teaching what magic is for," Harry said. "The founders built the school with a specific philosophical framework, that magic is a shared inheritance, not a personal resource to be exploited. That framework has been almost completely eroded. The result is that brilliant, powerful people grow up with no ethical framework for their power and no understanding of the traditions they're drawing from. The Compact's heir has the authority to address that, but meaningful implementation requires Ministry recognition of the new curriculum structure." "And this curriculum," she said. "Who designs it?" "McGonagall has started," Hermione said, unable to help herself. "I've contributed some preliminary notes. The core principle is that magical theory is taught alongside magical history, and magical history includes the Compact's framework and the consequences of its violation." Bagnold looked at Hermione with the expression that kept appearing on people's faces in her vicinity. "How old are you?" 18, Hermione said. "In a few weeks." Bagnold looked back at Harry. "Fine," she said. "All 3. I'll need the legal team to draft the constitutional recognition, which will take time, and it will require a Wisengamot vote on the curriculum provisions." She paused. "There will be opposition." "I expect so," Harry said. "People with political interests in the current arrangement won't be happy about constitutional precedent that limits Ministry authority." "No," Harry said. "But unhappy is different from able to stop it, and the documentation establishes the precedent clearly enough that the Wisengamot vote is essentially confirmatory rather than determinative. The Compact exists whether they vote on it or not. What the vote determines is whether the Ministry chooses to be in aligned relationship with the constitutional framework of its own country's magical foundations, or in conflict with it." Bagnold looked at him steadily. Then she almost smiled. You've thought about this. Heart room, Harry said. 4 hours. Very good thinking environment. The afternoon brought Skeeter. Harry had been expecting her eventually. She appeared at the castle gates around 2 o'clock, quill already deployed, accompanied by a photographer and the specific energy of a woman who has been chasing a story of the decade and has finally located it. The wards reported her presence and Harry told McGonagall, who said absolutely not in a tone that suggested years of professional grievance. Actually, Harry said, let her in. McGonagall looked at him. She's going to write something regardless, Harry said. If I let her in and talk to her directly, I control what she gets. If I don't, she speculates, and her speculation has historically been quite creative. Mr. Potter, McGonagall said, Rita Skeeter is not. I know what she is, Harry said. I also know that the wizarding public is going to find out about all of this within 24 hours no matter what anyone does, and the first account they read is going to shape how they understand it for years. I'd rather that account come from a direct conversation with me than from whatever she assembles from fragments and unnamed sources. McGonagall pressed her lips together. I'll be in the room, she said. Wouldn't have it any other way, Harry said. Rita Skeeter had the particular quality of a person who has spent a career operating from a position of information advantage, and who finds the experience of being outmaneuvered genuinely disorienting. She swept into the conference room with her quill poised and her smile sharp and her eyes already moving around the space, cataloging, assessing. She saw Harry and her smile went through a rapid recalibration. Harry, she said. You look different, Harry said. Yes. Sit down, Rita. She sat. The quill hovered. Before we start, Harry said, ground rules. The quill records what I actually say, not its creative interpretation of what I say. If it embellishes, I'll know, I'll read the copy before publication, and if it differs from what was said, I won't allow publication. He held up the ring. I can enforce that in ways that are fairly difficult to circumvent. Skeeter looked at the ring. Her quill wavered. Second, Harry said, the story you're going to write is bigger than anything you've published before, and it's entirely true, which I know isn't always the constraint you work under. The biggest story in wizarding history doesn't need embellishment. It needs accurate reporting. You're offering me the exclusive, she said. I'm offering you the truth, Harry said. Which, if you're the journalist you occasionally claim to be, is more valuable. A pause. The quill steadied. All right, she said. Tell me. Harry told her. It took 90 minutes. He told her everything, Gringotts, the vault, the ring, the compact, the summons, the acknowledgements, the Horcruxes, Voldemort's voluntary surrender. He answered her questions directly and without deflection, including the complicated ones, what happened in the Heart Room, what Voldemort had been like on the castle steps, what the Draco Malfoy acknowledgement had looked like and what it meant. The quick quotes quill worked steadily throughout. Occasionally it attempted a more dramatic phrasing and Harry stopped it and restated, and after the third time it happened, the quill seemed to accept the constraint and settled into accurate transcription with something that might have been professional sulk if quills were capable of that. At the end, Skeeter sat back and looked at her notes and was quiet for a moment in a way that was different from her usual professional calculations. Something had happened during the 90 minutes that Harry had watched happen, the story had gotten larger than her instinct to shape it, and she'd followed it rather than fighting it, and now she was sitting with the full weight of what she actually had. The acknowledgements, she said. Voldemort's. What did it look like? I already described it, Harry said. I know. But off the record, what did it actually look like? To you. Harry considered her. Off the record meant the quill stopped, which it had. Sad, he said. Mostly sad. Like watching someone understand something 30 years too late. Skeeter looked at him. For a moment, very briefly, something crossed her face that was not her professional mask and not the sharp calculation and not the maneuvering, but something more honest that she usually kept out of her work entirely. "I'll do it right," she said. "I know," Harry said. He wasn't being kind. He meant it. She was capable of doing it right, had always been capable of it, and had spent years choosing not to because wrong was more profitable. Today the truth was the biggest story she'd ever have, and she knew it. He walked her to the gate himself. As the photographer took a single shot of the castle's exterior, Harry had requested no photographs of individuals, which Skeeter had accepted without fighting it. She looked at the building with an expression that was unusually open for her. "The curriculum changes," she said. "What do they actually involve?" "Teaching the history honestly," Harry said. "Starting with the compact. What the founders built and why and what happened when it was neglected. Teaching students that their magic comes from somewhere and has obligations attached." He paused. "Teaching them about Tom Riddle. The full story. Not as a monster story. As a human one." Skeeter turned to look at him. "That's going to be controversial." "Most true things are," Harry said. She left. The gate closed behind her, and the ward settled, and Harry stood on the steps and looked at the grounds in the afternoon light, the lake, the mountains, the dark edge of the forbidden forest, and felt the castle attending behind him, its old warm presence as constant as the stone it was made from. That evening, Harry went back to the heart room alone. Not to use it, not to access the wards or review the compact's mechanisms or manage any of the 1,000 practical considerations that had been filling the past 2 days. He went to sit in it. To be in it. The way you return to a room that has been important to you, not for any functional purpose but because the room itself is worth the visit. The walls glowed at his presence, the familiar amber light, and the writing of 1,000 years surrounded him, and the mosaic floor was warm underfoot, and the stone chair was exactly what it always was, plain and worn and waiting, and he sat in it and put his hands on the armrests and didn't do anything except be there. He thought about his parents. Not with grief, exactly, though the grief was there. It always was, a specific and permanent feature of his interior landscape that he had long since stopped trying to resolve and simply accommodated. He thought about them with a kind of gratitude that felt cleaner than it ever had before. Lily Evans, who had carried Hufflepuff blood through a Muggle family and emerged brilliant and magical and laughing, and James Potter, who had carried Gryffindor and Peverell and Slytherin through a pure bloodline with enough dilution that nobody had ever looked at it clearly. 2 people who had no idea what they were carrying and who had loved each other and had him, and in having him had created the convergence that the compact had been waiting for since 1483. He thought about Dumbledore. About the portrait upstairs, which had said I should have looked harder with the simplicity of genuine regret, and he thought about what looking harder would have meant, whether it would have changed anything or whether this was exactly the path it had to take, the long way, through all of it, because that was what produced the person who could sit in this chair and not flinch. He thought about Voldemort, somewhere in London now, having walked himself into ministry custody with Griphook as a witness and whatever remained of his internal world settling into the shape of a man who has given something up and is learning what is left when you do. He sat for an hour. The room was quiet and warm and it asked nothing of him and he gave it nothing except his presence, and they were, for a while, simply together, the air and the heart of the school, each of them exactly what they were supposed to be. Then he went upstairs, because there was still so much to do. The Wisengamot session was scheduled for 3 weeks out, which gave Hermione's documentation time to circulate among those members whose minds could be changed by thorough reading, and gave Harry time to have individual conversations with those whose minds couldn't be changed by reading but might be changed by a direct, honest conversation with the heir of Hogwarts in a room with no witnesses and the full attending presence of the Founder's Ring. These conversations went well. Not because Harry manipulated or intimidated, he did neither, and the ring made manipulation structurally impossible even if he tried, because the castle's connection to the compact extended to something very like a truth requirement in its heir's proximity. People in the ring's presence found it difficult to be dishonest in the particular way that mattered, not to lie about facts, but to deceive themselves about their own motivations. Several of the Wisengamot members found this uncomfortable. Harry was sympathetic about it without being apologetic, which seemed to be the right calibration. Draco, meanwhile, had stayed at Hogwarts. This was partly practical. His home was a crime scene, his father was cooperating with Ministry investigators, and the family network that usually provided Draco with a scaffolding of social certainty had temporarily collapsed. But Harry thought it was also something more than practical. Draco moved through the castle with the expression of someone learning to exist without armor and finding the process both terrifying and quietly revelatory. He'd had a conversation with McGonagall that Harry hadn't been present for, the details of which McGonagall had not disclosed but which had apparently lasted 2 hours and ended with Draco walking out looking as though something fundamental had shifted in his understanding of what his education had and hadn't given him. He came to find Harry one afternoon in the library, where Harry was reading through the Founder's original deliberations, the transcription Ron had found, which Harry kept returning to, Slytherin's words in particular acquiring new texture each time he read them. Draco sat across from him without being invited, which was new for Draco. The old version would have found some way to make the approach a statement. This one just sat down. "What happens to Hogwarts?" he said. "With the curriculum changes. Specifically." Harry looked at him. "What do you want to know about it?" "My education was..." Draco stopped. Started again. "I was taught that magic is something some people have and others don't. That having it makes you better than people who don't. That within the people who have it there's a further hierarchy based on how pure the source is." He said it flatly, without the defensive irony he would have applied to it 6 months ago. "That's the entire framework I was given. And you're saying that framework is not just wrong, it's in violation of the actual structure of how magic works." "Yes," Harry said. "So everything I was taught to value is built on a misunderstanding of what magic is," Harry said. "Not a random misunderstanding. A deliberate one, cultivated by people who benefited from it. The blood purity ideology exists because if magic is heritable in the simple Muggle genetic sense, it can be controlled and monopolized and used as a basis for hierarchy. If magic is what the Founders actually understood it to be, a shared inheritance from the foundations of the country itself, available in patterns that have nothing to do with who your parents were, then the hierarchy has no basis." Draco was quiet for a moment. "My father knew this," he said. "Not consciously. But he knew it on some level because he was terrified of it. The reason pure-blood families have always been so aggressive about blood status is because they could feel it wasn't as stable a foundation as they claimed." "Yes," Harry said. "Fear usually means you understand what you're afraid of." "Slytherin House," Draco said. He looked at the wall. "The way it's run. The culture. The specific way it teaches ambition as the highest value." He paused. "Slytherin himself didn't mean that." "No," Harry said. "He meant resourcefulness. Creativity. The courage of people who get things done in the world rather than through pure power. It got corrupted. Over centuries. Into something he'd recognize and be appalled by." Draco looked at him. "Are you going to fix it?" "McGonagall is going to fix it," Harry said. "With help. She's been wanting to for years and now she has the constitutional authority to do it without the school board overriding her at every turn." He looked at Draco. "She's going to need good people who understand what Slytherin House has been doing wrong from the inside. People who were educated in that culture and can articulate what needs to change." A pause. "I'm 17, Draco said. "So am I," Harry said. "Doesn't seem to have been a limiting factor." Draco looked at him for a long moment. Then something moved in his face that was, possibly for the first time in Harry's experience, completely unguarded, not performed vulnerability or calculated openness, but the actual expression of someone deciding something real. "All right," he said. "Good," Harry said, and went back to reading. The morning of the Wisengamot session, Harry stood in front of the mirror in the guest quarters and made no particular effort with his appearance, because he had decided some time ago that the ring spoke more clearly than robes and the castle's attending warmth was more authoritative than any formal outfit. Hermione knocked. "Ready?" "Yes," he said. Ron's head appeared around the door frame. "Kingsley says the chamber is completely full. Every seat. People standing in the gallery. Someone apparently tried to get in through a ventilation shaft and was removed by a concealment charm." "Media or public?" Harry asked. "Both," Ron said. "Rita's piece ran this morning." Harry had read it over breakfast. It was, as he'd told her it would be, entirely true. It was also the best thing she had ever written, taut and clear and carrying the weight of what had happened without any ornamentation, the facts themselves doing all the work that her usual prose did through embellishment. The headline was simple: "The Heir of Hogwarts, the True Account." No exclamation marks. No dramatic subtitle. Just the statement. The wizarding world had spent the morning reading it. The flu calls to the ministry had reportedly been running at 40 times normal volume. The letters to Hogwarts had filled McGonagall's office to a depth of several feet. The prophet had printed 3 additional runs by 8 in the morning and was preparing a 4th. "How do people seem?" Harry asked. Ron considered it with the honest attention he gave to questions about people, which was usually more accurate than anyone's polling or analysis. "Shocked," he said. "But not bad shocked. More like, you know when you've been carrying something heavy for a long time and someone takes it? That kind of shocked." He paused. "There's a lot of crying, apparently. In the letters." Harry thought about that. "Okay," he said. "Let's go." The Wizengamot chamber was exactly as full as Kingsley had said. Harry had been in the ministry's atrium before, in the high-stakes discomfort of Dumbledore's trial and various Voldemort-related crises, always as a defendant or a problem or a symbol of something the ministry found inconvenient. Today he walked through it as something the ministry hadn't previously categorized and had spent the past 3 weeks rapidly adjusting to. The atrium had changed. The golden fountain was gone, removed in the aftermath of the war's escalation, replaced with a simpler memorial that was under construction, a list of names being carved in stone by an enchanted chisel that was currently idle, waiting for the final accounting. Harry stopped in front of it for a moment and looked at the names already there. His parents were there. Sirius. Cedric. Others. He placed one hand on the stone, not theatrically, not for anyone watching. Because they'd brought him here. Every one of them. The specific configuration of love and loss that had produced Harry Potter, 17 years old with a 1,000-year-old ring on his finger and no particular patience for the world being smaller than it could be. Then he walked to the chamber. The moment he entered, the noise that had been filling the space, conversations, movement, the particular buzz of 300 witches and wizards packed into a formal chamber, stopped. Not gradually. All at once. The castle wasn't here, but the ring was, and the ring carried enough of the castle's attending presence that the room felt it. Harry walked to the center of the chamber and stood in the space that was usually reserved for defendants or petitioners, and he looked around at the assembled Wizengamot, the plum-robed officials and the ministry representatives and the public gallery above. Every face turned to him, and the particular quality of their attention was different from anything he'd experienced before from crowds. Not the uncomfortable, staring curiosity of the boy who lived. Not the skeptical hostility of his 5th year. Not the anxious hopefulness of people looking to him to solve a problem they couldn't solve themselves. Recognition. Not of him specifically. Of what he carried. The ring's warmth, the compact's authority, the ancient patient weight of Hogwarts behind him, they felt it, all 300 of them, in the specific register that magic speaks to people who've grown up with it, the register below conscious thought that deals in things older than language. Harry let them feel it for a moment. He didn't perform it, it simply was, the way the castle simply was, present without requiring acknowledgement. Then he spoke. I'm going to be direct with you, he said, because I think you deserve directness. You've read Rita Skeeter's account, or you've heard it from someone who has, and you've spent the last few hours trying to work out what it means and what comes next. I'm going to tell you. The silence held. Voldemort is in Ministry custody and will face trial, Harry said. The trial will be fully public. Every account, every crime, every victim will be on the record. Nothing sealed, nothing managed for convenience or political sensitivity. The wizarding world has been kept in the dark about things that were happening to it for too long, and that ends with this. He looked around the chamber. The Founders' Compact is constitutional precedent in British magical law. It has always been. The Wisengamot's vote today is not about whether to accept that, it's about whether this body chooses to work in aligned relationship with the constitutional framework of magical Britain, or whether it prefers to spend the next decade fighting it. I'd recommend the former. The latter will be exhausting and unsuccessful. A ripple moved through the chamber. Not protest, adjustment. The recalibration of people who have been given the precise terms of a situation and are processing them. The Hogwarts curriculum changes will be implemented beginning this September, Harry continued. Students will learn the Compact's history. They will learn what magic is, where it comes from, and what obligations come with it. They will learn the real history of British wizarding culture, not the version that was comfortable for people with an interest in maintaining a particular hierarchy, but the actual one. This is not negotiable, and it's not a ministry decision. It's the heir's authority under the compact, and I'm exercising it. He paused. What is open for collaborative discussion is how the transition is implemented, what support structures the ministry provides, and how the existing educational framework is adapted rather than demolished. I want your input on that. Genuinely. Another ripple. Louder, more varied, but still not protest. The sound of people who have been told something they expected to fight and have found that the terms don't actually require fighting. The blood status question, Harry said, and the chamber went to its deepest quiet yet, because this was the nerve, the thing that everything else had always been organized around, the center of the ideology that had sent a generation to war. The compact is explicit about this. Magic is not hereditary in the way that eye color is hereditary. It flows through patterns that have no correlation with blood purity. Hermione Granger, who is Muggle-born, carries magical ability that traces through a lineage the pure blood hierarchy's framework cannot account for. Lily Potter, my mother, was Muggle-born and carried 2 founder bloodlines. The framework of blood purity is not only morally indefensible, it's factually wrong. It's based on a misunderstanding of what magic is. The Compact's authority makes its continuation in any institutionalized form a violation of Britain's constitutional magical law, and I will treat it as such. No ripple this time. A different quality of silence, the silence of something landing that people have, in varying degrees, known was coming and have been holding in suspension. I'm not here to run the ministry, Harry said. I'm not here to govern wizarding Britain in the political sense. The Compact's heir is not a king and not a politician and not a replacement for the democratic institutions this country has built. What I am is the steward of this country's magical foundations. That means some things are mine to protect and some things are yours to manage, and I believe very strongly in the distinction. He looked around the chamber one more time. What I am asking from this body today is 3 things. Constitutional recognition of the Compact. Support for the curriculum implementation. And a commitment to a trial process for Voldemort and his followers that is transparent, thorough, and fair. Not just to the defendants, to the victims. The people who suffered. They deserve a full accounting, not a managed one. He stopped. The chamber was quiet. Then Kingsley Shacklebolt, from his position in the senior Auror seats, started a slow, deliberate applause that was not the enthusiastic kind, not performative, just steady, measured, the applause of someone who means it. It spread. Not universally, there were members of the Wisengamot who sat with folded arms and expressions that said this conversation was not over, and Harry registered each of them because he'd need to have direct conversations with those specific people in the coming weeks, and he preferred to know in advance who they were. But the majority of the chamber was with him, and the majority was enough. The vote passed 2 hours later, after procedural discussion that Harry sat through with patience. Constitutional recognition of the Founders' Compact. Ministerial support for curriculum transition. Public trial commitment. 3 for 3. He walked out of the ministry in the late afternoon with Ron and Hermione and the specific feeling of having moved something enormous a significant distance in a short period of time, and the equal and accurate understanding that it was going to need to keep being moved, day after day, decision after decision, because this was not the end of something. This was what the beginning of something actually looked like, not a dramatic conclusion but a shifted foundation, and all the building that still needed to be done on top of it. Right, Ron said, on the atrium steps. What now? September, Harry said. Students arrive in September. The curriculum needs to be ready. McGonagall needs to brief the faculty. The legal team needs to prepare the trial framework. He thought about it. And I need to go back to the Heart Room and finish reading the Founders' Archive because I'm maybe a third of the way through and there are clearly things in there that are going to matter. Obviously, Hermione said, in the tone of someone who had identified this months ago. Also, Ron said, I'd like to point out that we have not, at any point in the last week, addressed the fact that we are technically 17 and we're supposed to be completing our 7th year at Hogwarts. Harry looked at him. Are you concerned about that? Personally, no, Ron said. I think we've covered the curriculum. But my mom is going to have things to say about it. Harry laughed, a real one, loose and easy, the kind that had been less available to him for a long time and that came more freely now. Some interior constraint dissolved along with everything else in the Heart Room. The afternoon light caught the ministry's exterior and made it briefly golden, the way ordinary light did with ordinary buildings, indifferent to everything that had happened inside them. The ring was warm on his finger. Steady and patient and attending, the way the castle was always attending, not demanding, not urgent, not the weight of obligation he'd spent years dreading. Just present. Just his. Come on, Harry said. Let's go home. And Hogwarts, which had waited 1,000 years for the heir to say exactly that and mean it without reservation, received them with all the warmth of old stone and older magic and the particular grace of something that has been patient for a very long time and has, at last, been answered. 3 weeks later, in a high tower in the mountains of Austria, Gellert Grindelwald sat in the dark and felt the last of his compact debt dissolve into honesty, and thought about a boy with bright eyes he had known in another century, and did something he had not done in 40 years. He slept without dreaming of power. And in Hogwarts, in September, the first years arrived. They came across the lake in boats, the way they always had, the castle rising above them in the dark with its lights in every tower. And this year, as they crossed the threshold of the entrance hall for the first time and felt the attending warmth of the oldest magical building in Britain reach out to greet them, the warmth of 1,000 years of human learning and courage and occasional spectacular failure, all of it preserved and present, several of them stopped. Not from fear. From recognition. Something in the castle knowing them. Something in the stone saying, yes, you. You belong here. Whatever you are and wherever you come from and whatever the world has told you about the value of your blood or the limits of your ability, you belong here, and the magic that lives in these walls is partly yours, and what you do with it matters, and we have been waiting for you. The heir of Hogwarts stood at the top of the marble staircase and watched them come in. He was still 17. He was still Harry. He still had terrible hair and needed new glasses and was going to have an extremely complicated conversation with Mrs. Weasley about his academic record and had approximately 300 things on his to-do list that had nothing to do with prophecies or Dark Lords or ancient compacts and everything to do with the ordinary, enormous, irreplaceable work of making something good. The first years looked up and saw him, and the ring caught the candlelight of the entrance hall, and the castle breathed. And Harry Potter looked down at the newest students of Hogwarts, inheritors of everything the founders had built and everything the centuries had corrupted and everything 1 week in July had begun to restore, and he smiled. Not the cautious smile of someone managing expectations. Not the performed warmth of a symbol trying to be human. The real one. "Welcome," he said, and the word rang off the ancient stone and up through the floors and into the towers and down into the heart room far below, where the walls glowed softly and the mosaic floor was warm and the stone chair sat empty and waiting for the next time it was needed. "Welcome." The stone remembered. And the story continued.